Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Joseph Douce. Joseph Douce was born on April 13, 1945, into a poor Catholic family in St. Truden, Belgium. As a child, he enjoyed studying languages and religion. After completing his military service, he moved to France in 1964. In 1967, Joseph became a Protestant and later went to Switzerland to study to become a pastor. From 1970 to 1974, he served in parishes in Lens and Bethune. Unlike many others during that time, especially those in religious roles, Joseph knew he was gay and he accepted it. He sought to understand his feelings better and to learn about the LGBTQ community. This interest led him to study psychology and sexology, with the aspiration of eventually establishing a center to support sexual minorities. Between 1974 and 1976, Joseph researched the pastoral and psychological needs of sexual minorities at the Free University of Amsterdam. His studies received partial financial support from a church grant. After completing his studies, Joseph relocated to Paris and established the Center to Christ Libertar, CCL, inside a theater that primarily screened pornographic films. This choice was influenced by the cultural attitudes of the time, which marginalized the LGBTQ+ community and limited Joseph's options for setting up his center. At the CCL, Joseph was able to connect with wealthy and professional individuals who helped him relocate the center to a better facility. The CCL published a small magazine titled He Liberates, He Loved, and created a publishing branch that produced numerous books on complex topics, including transgender issues, sadomasochism, and controversial subjects like pedophilia. Joseph performed the blessing ceremony for all the couples, which made him and CCL became a controversial topic at that time. In 1982, Joseph became a French citizen and, along with the CCL, helped establish the International Gay Association. Through his wide network of supporters, he learned about the AIDS outbreak and became one of the first educators on the topic in Paris. In the late 1980s, he and his partner, Guy Bonda, opened a bookstore in the city center that offered literature in multiple languages, often addressing sensitive issues and presenting diverse perspectives. A bookstore employee recalled an incident where a large stone was thrown through the door's window, which was perceived as a warning. On July 19, 1990, around 9 p.m., two men claiming to be police officers knocked on Joseph's door. They requested that he go with them. They also assures Guy that Joseph will be back in about 30 minutes. However, Joseph never returned home. After 24 hours without news, Guy contacted the authorities. For days later, he officially reported Joseph missing, stating that Joseph had been taken by men who were posing as police. 3 months later, a mushroom hunter found Joseph's remains in the Rambouillet forest, located 16 miles southwest of Paris. The body was so decomposed that it was nearly unrecognizable. An autopsy indicated that Joseph had likely been strangled just hours after his last sighting by Guy. Joseph's murder remains unsolved and has led to a lot of speculation. At the time, there were rumors suggesting he was killed because he had information about high-ranking officials involved in pedophilia. It was later revealed that he was being monitored by the DCRG, the intelligence agency in France during that period. The DCRG believed that Joseph was running a pedophile ring from his bookshop, as he hosted a support group for pedophiles every Sunday evening. The primary suspect in Joseph's case is Jean-Marc Dufour, an officer from DCRG who was responsible for the surveillance. After Joseph's body was found, he and his 4 team members were questioned. Guy recognized Jean as a man who had visited their home in June 1990. At that time, he and another person appeared to be drunk, acting inappropriately, and making a lot of noise. They also continuously knocked on Joseph's door on the night he went missing. Although Jean and his team were nearby meeting an informant, but investigators could not establish any evidence linking them to Joseph's disappearance. There are speculations that the group aimed to scare Joseph, but things went too far. However, there is no evidence to clarify what happened to Joseph in 1991. Gene was dismissed from the DCRG after he shot angrily at the door of an informant, a gay man and illustrator he had previously tried to recruit for the CCL. 7 years later, 2 senior police officials faced trial for wiretapping Joseph's phone from July 12 to July 30, 1990. In 2007, Joseph's case was officially closed, leaving his murder unsolved. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. As the eldest of 3 children, Jessica took on significant responsibilities from a young age, helping her parents care for her 2 younger brothers while they worked. At age 15, Jessica started working part-time at a restaurant to save money to buy her first car, a red Pontiac. A few years later, she bought the car she wanted. Despite her job, Jessica excelled in school and began planning to attend college, where she hoped to study accounting. In the fall of 1999, 17-year-old Jessica was about to start her senior year of high school. She had also started dating a boy, which made her very happy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's parents went to work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. However, Jessica did not leave for school as planned. Later that day, around noon, Jessica's mother returned home from work and noticed something unusual. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. The mother went to Jessica's room, thinking that maybe she had overslept and missed school. But Jessica was not in her bedroom. The mother then considered the possibility that Jessica might have gotten a ride to school from her father, so she called him to ask. However, he told her that he had gone to work alone that morning. Jessica's mother suspected something was wrong with her car, so she took out a spare key to try to start the car. When she approached the car, the driver's door was slightly open, and Jessica's cell phone was lying on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, indicating that she had tried to call 911. Jessica's shoes and keys were found under the front seat, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back seat. Jessica's mother was worried about Jessica's safety. It was obvious that she had tried to call for help but was unsuccessful. Furthermore, Jessica could not leave her belongings in the car and leave. Jessica's parents contacted her school, learning that Jessica had not come to class that day. When Jessica's best friend at work called her parents a few hours later, saying that Jessica had not come to work, they became even more worried about Jessica. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the police, but the sheriff downplayed the situation, suggesting that Jessica might have wandered off and would return home on her own. Despite Jessica's parents' pleas, the sheriff refused to open an investigation. Undeterred, Jessica's parents contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had any information about Jessica's whereabouts. They then searched the entire town, scouring the area, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Jessica's parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that she had not returned home. The sheriff sent 2 officers to check Jessica's car. However, the officers searched the car without wearing gloves, potentially destroying evidence. Furthermore, the officers did not search Jessica's room. Feeling frustrated with the police, Jessica's parents sought the help of the local media, hoping to draw attention to Jessica's disappearance and the police's lack of attention. Jessica's family and friends, led by her father and Uncle Stanley, launched a search for Jessica. They also distributed flyers with information about Jessica. Fearing the worst, they focused their search on an area near a river, which was known to be a crime hub. For hours, Jessica's family members thoroughly searched the challenging terrain near the river but couldn't find any sign of Jessica. The next morning, Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, saying he had heard a faint cry for help that sounded exactly like his sister's voice. Jessica's father immediately grabbed his gun and ran outside to find the source of the screams. At the same time, his brother arrived and joined the search. They quickly noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, 40-year-old David Brooks. As they approached, they saw Brooks undressing on his property. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. This was not the only unusual behavior Brooks displayed. Before Jessica's disappearance, the two families had a normal relationship. However, soon after, he would drive slowly past their house, staring at them with an ominous smile. After seeing Brooks burning clothes on their property, Jessica's parents went back to the police, shared their concerns and asked them to come and meet Brooks with the dogs. The police agreed. The dogs were given some of Jessica's clothes to track her scent. They led the police to Brooks's fire pit, but no significant evidence was found. However, the dogs did find black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds that smelled like decomposition. During the search, no concrete evidence was found. Frustrated with the police, Jessica's father contacted the FBI for help. The FBI usually does not get involved in missing persons cases based on the family's request, but this time they decided to investigate immediately. After Jessica's parents presented the case and the family's findings, the FBI opened a full-scale investigation. The FBI proceeded to collect fingerprints from Jessica's room and her car, confiscating all potential evidence for further analysis. Additionally, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the area using helicopters and volunteers. They thoroughly examined the pond near Jessica's home. The FBI searched Brooks' farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. This discovery led the FBI to strongly suspect Brooks' involvement in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, although despite a thorough search, the FBI found no evidence. Due to lack of incriminating evidence, the investigation focused on searching the surrounding area. 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call on September 27th. A woman was driving along a road near the river. Noticing something unusual near a tree, the woman stopped to check and was horrified to see a body. She called the police immediately. When FBI agents arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who had suffered severe trauma. She was missing several fingers and toes. A rope tied around her legs showed traces of red and silver paint. Additionally, some of her clothing was missing, suggesting that she may have been sexually assaulted, leading the FBI to develop disturbing theories about the murder. Medical experts later confirmed the identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled. Her body also showed extensive bruising. Her limbs and fingers had been separated after death, suggesting that she was still alive when this happened. However, the most disturbing fact was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days after she went missing. This meant that the police had the opportunity to rescue her. But unfortunately, they did not take any action to do so. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who changed his story. He initially said he had seen Jessica near her home, but later said he had not seen her. His alibi was disputed by his wife, and he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed to trial. The FBI said the likelihood of a conviction was low due to a lack of concrete evidence. While they had some troubling clues that pointed to his involvement, they were circumstantial and inconclusive. As the trial progressed, detectives continued to search for additional evidence. During a re-examination of Brooks' car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie Jessica up. However, analysis showed no DNA on the rope. Brooks' trial began in January 2003. His attorney maintained his innocence, citing a lack of evidence. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators had found the victim's missing limbs but had not properly preserved them, causing them to decompose and lose potential evidence. The remaining circumstantial evidence was insufficient to convict, and the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in Brooks' acquittal. Under state law, he could only be brought back if new evidence was discovered. Jessica's parents were devastated by the outcome. The parents also felt that if the police had done their job properly, Jessica might still be alive. Over time, the case went cold and was largely abandoned, leaving the family without closure. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department and was tasked with reviewing unsolved cases. Lynn Hunt began by examining the murder case of Jessica. However, she was shocked to find that the original investigation was poorly handled, with case files containing errors and lacking key information from interviews with relevant parties. The evidence was also not properly documented, forcing Lynn Hunt to start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the crime. Hunt met with Jessica's family and obtained a box of her belongings that had been kept in her car at the time of the murder. One of her brothers, now an adult, had kept the box since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn Hunt was again disappointed by the careless handling of the evidence, as it had not been stored according to protocol. Her efforts paid off when she discovered a crucial document, Brooks' medical examination report, which revealed that Brooks had an IQ of 61, which is considered low. With a low IQ, Brooks may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. All of this led Lynn Hunt to think that this man might not have anything to do with the case. Lynn Hunt began to consider other suspects. Lynn Hunt conducted an extensive review of everyone connected to the case and those living in the surrounding area. This investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death. A coworker contacted Lynn Hunt with information about an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know who killed Jessica. Lynn Hunt initially dismissed the information as unreliable. Many inmates make up stories to get released early. However, Lynn Hunt verified the information before dismissing it. Lynn Hunt visited the prison and met a man who told her that he had previously shared a cell with another inmate. During conversations, the inmate revealed to him that he was responsible for the murder of Jessica Dishon. The informant revealed that Stanley Dishon, Jessica Dishon's uncle, had a dark secret. According to the informant, Stanley confessed to years of sexual abuse of Jessica while they lived under the same roof. He warned her that if she spoke about the abuse, he would kill her or someone she cared about. When Jessica started dating in the spring of 1999, Stanley became increasingly fearful that she might confide in her boyfriend about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. On September 10th, Stanley visited Jessica at her home when she was alone, and he saw her packing her belongings into her car. He approached her and asked her to end her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Jessica refused, threatening to expose Stanley's actions if he did not leave her alone. As Stanley threatened her, causing Jessica to reach for the phone to call 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but she broke free and ran back to her room. Stanley followed her into her room, striking her before binding her with her own sheets. Stanley then dragged her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley held Jessica captive for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before ultimately killing her. Stanley then placed her body in a visible location near the road and buried the bloody sheets under the shed. Additionally, Stanley removed some of Jessica's limbs in an attempt to mislead the police, making it seem like the murder was the work of drug traffickers. Lynn Hunt was intrigued to discover that this crucial detail about the missing limbs had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives were aware that her body had been mutilated, which meant the informant couldn't have fabricated this information. Furthermore, Stanley claimed to have buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Determined to verify the informant's story, Lynn Hunt decided to search for buried evidence. With limited resources at the local police department, she enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, keeping Stanley's possible guilt a secret. She did not report her suspected evidence to them. On the first day of the search, no clues were found despite searching the areas described by the informant. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn Hunt returned to the scene. On the way, they noticed an abandoned barn on the side of the road and decided to search. Inside the barn, they began digging. Their search uncovered a buried bed sheet. Lynn Hunt collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Since her disappearance, her parents had left her room unchanged, which helped in verifying the evidence. Upon comparison, Lynn Hunt confirmed that the bed sheet was indeed from Jessica's bedding, as it matched the pattern of the other linens and was missing from her bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and questioned by police. Although he appeared visibly shaken during questioning, he refused to confess to the crime. Stanley was eventually charged with murder and the case went to trial. This news shocked Jessica's father. The murderer he had been searching for was none other than his own brother Stanley Dishon. As the trial progressed, Lynn Hunt dug into Stanley's past to gather more evidence. She knew that he had assaulted Jessica, but her investigation uncovered that several of Stanley's female relatives had come forward to report that he had sexually abused them as children. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming he was temporarily homeless, and asked to stay at their home. However, when left alone with the young girls in their homes, Stanley would sexually assault them, threatening them to ensure their silence. Based on multiple similar accounts, police deduced that Stanley had been engaging in this behavior for approximately 3 decades. Lynn Hunt knew full well that a conviction for murder would be difficult, given the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, linking Stanley to the crime. Undeterred, Lynn Hunt continued her investigation and stumbled upon a box of old case files that had not been examined before. As she sifted through the boxes, Lynn Hunt was once again frustrated with the police who had originally handled the case. She noticed a letter dated June 26, 2002. A concerned person had written to the police at the time, recounting a story identical to one Lynn Hunt later heard from an inmate at the Kentucky Penitentiary. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. While in prison, he confided in a fellow inmate about killing his niece, Jessica. Unbeknownst to Stanley, his fellow inmate was a police informant who soon wrote a detailed letter to the police investigating the case, exposing the horrific events surrounding Jessica's death. However, police believed Brooks was the prime suspect at the time, causing them to ignore other potential leads. This inaction left Lynn Hunt deeply frustrated, becoming frustrated with the lack of professionalism of his colleagues. If the police had done their job properly, this case could have been solved in 2002. After all these years, Lynn Hunt could only hope that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions at the upcoming trial. The process began in 2015 when Stanley appeared in court, pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents were furious. The prosecution believed that a guilty verdict on the murder charges would be difficult due to a lack of evidence. There were also assault charges against other female family members. The prosecution would need these family members to testify in court, sharing explicit details about Stanley's actions against them. Given these challenges, the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, Stanley would have to plead guilty to both the assaults on his relatives and Jessica's murder. Ultimately, Stanley accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. Jessica's parents, who wanted the truth, were unhappy with this arrangement, but Stanley remained silent in accordance with the terms of the plea deal. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Since he was 56 years old at the time of his conviction, he could be released at age 71. The case of Alison Bonilla. Alison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. She is an only child, living with her mother Yendrai Vasquez. In addition to her mother, her grandparents Ramon and Marjorie, and her aunt Samara also helped raise Alison. Alison's father left the family shortly after her birth. He chose to be with another woman who was pregnant. He did not want to play a role in Alison's life. Only once, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer, did he ask to see his daughter, and Yendrai allowed him to. It is worth noting that his second family did not know about Alison's existence. Alison and her mother, Yendrai, had a particularly close relationship. For Alison, Yendrai was not only a mother but also a father. Therefore, Alison often gave her mother gifts on Father's Day. Their relationship went beyond the typical mother-daughter relationship. Alison felt comfortable sharing everything with Yendrai without fear of being misunderstood or judged. Despite not having a father, Alison did not feel lonely or abandoned. She had a large family and enjoyed spending time with them. She also attended church regularly every Sunday. Relatives described Alison as a kind, outgoing, and friendly girl. In photos, she always looked happy, and there was no sign of sadness or longing in her eyes. Alison had always dreamed of becoming a model. She decided to drop out of 8th grade to focus on makeup classes, thinking that combining the two was too difficult. She did not want to waste time on something that would not help her achieve her goals. After that, Alison started looking for a job to help her mother pay the bills but did not receive any responses from the places she applied. This made her very sad. Her mother, Yendrai, realized that her daughter would have difficulty finding a job due to her limited education, so she encouraged Alison to take evening classes. At age 18, Alison enrolled in Liceo Enrique Geyer, a few miles from home. During this time, she completed a pastry course and began practicing. Alison made delicious cakes and desserts that were loved by everyone in the neighborhood. This helped her find a way to make money from her baking talent. Alison had a boyfriend named Harold Sura Solano who lived in Cachi, a district in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. Usually, Alison stayed home with her mother in the morning, then met Harold, and then went to evening school at 6 o'clock. She often returned home late by bus. The route from the bus stop to her house was dangerous, dark, and deserted. Therefore, Alison always informed her mother of her location, and sometimes her mother picked her up at the bus stop or halfway. On March 4, 2020, Alison went to her mother's nail salon, then visited her classmate Pal for about 15 minutes. They arrived at school at 6 p.m. and separated because they had different classes. Alison arrived at school and waited in an empty classroom for about 15 minutes before realizing that her classes had been canceled for the day. Instead of going home right away, she decided to visit her aunt who lived near the school. However, her aunt was not home. Alison then decided to go to her boyfriend Harold's house. When she arrived, she learned that Harold was at work but would be back soon. Harold's mother invited Alison inside to wait. When Harold returned, the family had dinner together, talking about a variety of topics and discussing future plans. After dinner, Harold excused himself for a moment, saying that he had urgent business to attend to but would be back soon. At 8:15 p.m., Alison left Harold's house without waiting for him to return. This set off a chain of events that would become nationally known. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later and, seeing that Alison had left, texted her to ask where she was and offered to give her a ride home on his bike. Alison replied immediately that she had already arrived at the bus stop. While waiting for the bus, she texted her friend Pa to ask if Pa's cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Pa's cousin refused because his bike was a special type and not suitable for two people. It is unclear why Alison did not ask her boyfriend for help. She may have been angry with him or did not want to bother him. Allison got off the bus at 8:43 p.m. Her house was about a mile away. Feeling anxious and scared, she texted her mother to pick her up. At 8:45 p.m., Allison texted her boyfriend and mother that two suspicious men had gotten out of a car and were following her. She decided to run home to avoid them. The road Allison was on was dangerous, poorly lit, and had few people. There was only one security camera there, which captured a blurry image that could have been Allison. Allison's mother, Yendrai, went to the bridge half a mile from their home to pick up her daughter but did not see her. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Allison might have gone back to the bus stop for safety. However, she did not find her there either. She finally thought that Allison had not seen her and had gone home on her own. When Yendrai returned home, she found that Allison was not there. She immediately called relatives and friends to ask for help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up and received a call from his Aunt Samara saying Allison was missing. He tried to contact Yendrai but was unsuccessful. 3 hours later, Yendrai reported Allison missing to the police, and the search began. Luckily, Yendrai had the last photo of Allison in the clothes she was wearing. Police checked several locations, from the bus stop to Allison's house, Kachi Lake, and the nearby hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, police found their first clue, Allison's glasses in the grass about a mile from her house. However, Allison seemed to have disappeared without a trace. 8 days later, they discovered Allison's identification on a coffee plantation. This was surprising because they had checked the area several times before. What was even more suspicious was that her ID was placed in such a conspicuous and clean location. As if someone had intentionally placed it there to mislead the investigation or hide something. 15 days after Allison went missing, Yendrai received a call from Allison's father. Instead of showing concern or offering help, he said that Allison was missing because she was too beautiful. Shocked by these insensitive words, Yendrai immediately hung up the phone, unable to believe what she had just heard. For a long time, the family, police, and volunteers continued to search for Allison. Every Sunday, they hung up posters with her picture. One day, they decided to paint messages on the streets, recreating Allison's journey from the intersection to the bridge, where she was believed to have disappeared. They also put up posters on roadside poles to attract the attention of passers-by. At the same time, the police received an important clue. A man came to the police station and said that he knew Allison and had seen her on the night she disappeared. According to the man, at around 8:30 p.m. On March 4th, he left his home on his motorbike to pick someone up. On the way, he saw Allison and a burgundy two-door BMW parked next to her. He turned around to check on the situation and realized it was his cousin's BMW. He was 100% sure of this because the car had distinctive bright yellow headlights. Another witness also confirmed to the police that he had seen the same BMW near where Allison went missing that evening. The car belonged to Nelson Sanchez Urania, 28, nicknamed Sukia. Locals called him that because they believed he was a member of a gang in the area. In fact, Nelson and Allison knew each other. Their families had been acquainted for a long time and had lived in the same neighborhood for a while. However, according to Allison's mother, they had only interacted with Nelson a few times. It was just a normal neighborly relationship, not a close friendship. One day, Nelson offered to give Allison and her cousins a ride home. She agreed because it was morning, she was not alone. And she thought Nelson was a good person. On March 2nd, 2020, 2 days before Allison went missing, Nelson contacted her via Facebook. He sent a message asking Allison to answer some questions. On her cousin's advice, Allison agreed to answer them. Next, Nelson asked Allison about her feelings for him. Specifically, He wanted to know if Allison liked him. Allison was confused by Nelson's sudden question, as they were not close and barely knew each other. When Allison asked why, Nelson explained that he did not have a negative opinion of her but wanted to know if she thought badly of him. Allison reassured Nelson that she did not hate him and that everything was normal between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. Police searched Nelson's home and seized his car, cell phone, and computer. Investigators found shocking images of women being abused on his phone. When they inspected the car, they found that it had been thoroughly cleaned with car polish. However, the front driver's seat carpet and trunk carpet had been removed. Police found hair and blood on the trunk lid and sent samples to a lab for analysis. After examining the exterior of the car, police used a police dog to search for traces. The dog detected possible blood on the two front seats and in the trunk. To confirm, the police used a luminol test, a chemical that reacts with hemoglobin in the blood. The results showed that there were many blood stains on the car's interior, despite the owner's efforts to remove them with cleaning products. While waiting for the results from the lab, Nelson remained free but was closely monitored by the police. They monitored his every move to prevent him from leaving the city or the country. Although Yendrai repeatedly requested his arrest, the police did not have enough evidence to do so. Therefore, Nelson continued to live freely without being prosecuted for many months. Yendrai believed that Allison had been kidnapped for ransom. She tried to stay calm and hoped that her daughter was still alive. In preparation for Allison's return, Yendrai kept her daughter's room as it was, not cleaning or rearranging the furniture. She even bought Allison a gift. Yendrai told the press, "I will continue to do so. As long as there is no evidence that she is dead, I still believe that my daughter is alive and will return home." Laboratory test results confirmed that the hair and blood found in Nelson's car belonged to Allison. The police immediately arrested Nelson. Later, his ex-girlfriend told the police that Nelson had never physically abused her but had put a lot of mental pressure on their relationship. Specifically, he forbade her from contacting her friends and using the internet. According to her, Nelson only wanted to have a sexual relationship with her. His previous boss revealed that he was very irresponsible at work and even stole about $11,000. Additionally, his landlord said an ex-girlfriend had broken up with him because she was tired of paying his debts. She described him as a very spoiled man. After that, Nelson confessed to his crimes against Allison. He said that on the night of Allison's disappearance, he found her walking alone on a deserted road. Taking advantage of the late hour and their acquaintance, Nelson offered to give Allison a ride. She agreed and got into the car without suspicion. However, instead of taking her home, Nelson drove to a remote coffee plantation and forced Allison out of the car. Nelson violently attacked her, knocking off her glasses and leaving her nearly unconscious. He dragged her to a nearby abandoned house, where he raped and brutally beat her. Nelson then tied her hands with cloth and duct tape to the front seat of his car. Finally, he stuffed her into the trunk of the car and drove to a dumpster in San Gerano Caci. There, the killer pushed Allison off a cliff into a pile of trash below. He justified his heinous actions by saying that he was under the influence of drugs. He also admitted that he had long been obsessed with Allison, and when he saw her that night, he decided it was his chance to carry out his dark intentions. Surprisingly, Nelson later recanted his initial statement, accusing the police of coercing him into confessing. However, the authorities had enough evidence to charge him despite his denials. The suspect could face a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. In the early morning of September 4th, a search party went to the Sanano landfill to look for Allison's body. However, because the area was large and difficult to access, finding Allison's remains was an extremely difficult task. Moreover, it had been 6 months since Allison went missing. Just 25 days after Allison confessed, the police discovered a number of important pieces of evidence. They found human bone fragments, including a spine, ribs, part of the pelvis, and a femur. They also found pieces of clothing that Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with a pair of sneakers with studs inside. All of these clues were sent for testing and thorough analysis by the police. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's defense attorney, questioned the authenticity of the evidence because it was found by volunteers, not professional police. He also said that the discovery of the remains coincided with the time his client declared his innocence, which was suspicious. Rodrigo Era, the attorney representing Allison's family, on the other hand, criticized the suspect's change of testimony, saying that it undermined the credibility of the official investigation. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed that the remains found belonged to Allison. Because only a partial body was found, they were unable to determine the exact cause of death. However, examination of the remains revealed multiple fractures that appeared after death, suggesting she may have fallen from a great height. Her clothes were torn and her sneakers had bite marks, suggesting a possible animal attack. This would explain why the remains were found scattered in different areas of the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendrai, is furious with the police for not listening and acting promptly. She believes that if they had arrested Nelson sooner, he would have confessed and Allison's body would have been found in better condition. This is an irreparable loss for the family. Despite the terrible pain she is enduring, Yendrai finds some solace in saying, "My daughter is in a better place now, where no one can hurt her anymore." The trial of Nelson took place on July 19, 2021. Harold, Allison's boyfriend, was a key witness in the case. According to Harold's testimony, on the afternoon of March 4, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he returned home and found Allison there with her mother. Harold then left for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. When he returned, he discovered that Allison had left without saying anything. While Allison was on her way home, Harold texted her repeatedly. As soon as she got off the bus, Allison texted Harold to say that two men were following her. Concerned for her safety, Harold suggested that she take a taxi and promised to pay for it. However, Allison refused twice and said that she would run home. Harold did not receive any further response from Allison after that text message. According to his explanation, he only informed his mother of the situation. He did not contact Allison's mother, Yendrai, because his phone battery died. He then fell asleep for about 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who called him to inform him that his girlfriend was missing. Since then, he said he has been worried and tried to call Allison several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. He also could not be reached via WhatsApp messages. Harold said he joined the search party for a few days but then had to stop because he felt unwell and had to go to work. He really wished things had gone differently. If he could go back in time, he would have taken Allison home that night. However, unfortunately, what happened cannot be changed. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson to 18 years in prison for taking the life of Allison. He could have received twice the sentence, but the judge pointed out that there was no evidence to confirm that Nelson knew the route and time Allison would return home and that he planned to attack her. Furthermore, due to the condition of Allison's remains, there was no evidence that Nelson forced her to have sex. The story does not end there. Allison's family was not satisfied with the original sentence, arguing that it was not commensurate with the crime. In 2022, they successfully appealed, and the court decided to retry the case. As a result, on September 28, 2023, Nelson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family's lawyer emphasized that Nelson acted in a cruel and inhumane manner and took advantage of the trust of the victim and her relatives. The court ruled that Nelson's actions were intentional. Nelson used his long-standing relationship with Allison to commit the crime. The criminal court also took into account Nelson's lack of remorse for his actions. Although still hurt and angry, the victim's family was relieved by the new verdict. The decision ended a painful chapter in their lives that lasted more than 3 years and put an end to this nightmare. Allison's family created a memorial at the spot where her body was found. They placed a cross, flowers, and a small altar with a photo of Allison and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Allison's case has caused a stir in Costa Rican media and social media. It has also led to many marches in memory of Allison and other women who have been victims of similar violence. The case of Amanda Anderson. Amanda Anderson was born on October 10, 1990, in Fridley, Minnesota, to Mark and Stacy Kennedy Anderson. Amanda lived with her family in New Chapel Hill, about 100 miles from Dallas. It's a small city with a population of less than 1,000 people. She grew up to be a bright and ambitious young woman, graduating with honors from the Tyler Gospel Chapel School in 2009. Amanda is an employee of Trinity Mother Francis and a student at Tyler Junior College, majoring in English literature. She was an aspiring writer, a lover of words, music, and life. But on September 15, 2010, Amanda's family had to face frightening events. Amanda's lifeless body was discovered at her family's home in New Chapel Hill. She was found by her 15-year-old brother, Nate Anderson. Nate had just returned home from a jog in the woods. He called 911 and explained the situation to the police. Nate said he went out for a run because he was stressed about homework. When he came back, he found the door to the house open, which was very unusual. He first checked his room, then Amanda's room, and that's when he saw his sister lying on the floor, unresponsive. The police asked Nate to clarify which door was open, and he explained that people usually entered the house through the garage door. Nate was very emotional, and the police tried to calm him down. When asked if he touched anything in the house, Nate replied that he did not. During the 911 call, Nate told the police that he had discovered the body of his sister Amanda. When asked if Amanda had been shot, Nate replied that she had multiple bullet holes in her head. When the police arrived on the scene, Nate told the same story. Further investigation by a criminologist revealed that Amanda had been sitting up in bed when she was shot, then she fell to the floor. Notably, there was no sign of a gun or shell casing at the crime scene, suggesting that the perpetrator may have taken the weapon with him when he left. Or may have used a revolver, which does not fire a shell casing. Amanda's parents were devastated and could not understand what had led to this tragic event. Being deeply religious people, they found it difficult to understand who could be capable of such a heinous act. Their daughter had just graduated from high school and was a kind person who did not want to harm others and had no enemies. Police began canvassing the neighborhood where the crime occurred to gather more information about Amanda and her family. In interviews, a nearby resident said that Amanda Anderson's family was happy and very religious. A neighbor offered a possible explanation for Amanda's death. He said that the area was generally quiet and low crime, but that about 2 weeks before Amanda died, a nearby home had been robbed. It was possible that the perpetrator of that robbery was also involved in Amanda's death. Perhaps the perpetrator saw Nate Anderson out for a run, broke into the home, and then shot Amanda when she discovered them. To explore this theory, police needed to find evidence to determine whether a botched robbery led to Amanda's death. When the police asked the family to check for any missing valuables, Amanda's father, Mark, thoroughly searched the house and confirmed that nothing had been taken. Although there were valuables such as jewelry and a laptop in Amanda's room, nothing was missing. Amanda's father, Mark, thoroughly searched the house and confirmed that nothing had been taken. This surprising discovery made the police question the motive behind the crime. If the intention of the criminals was to steal, why did they shoot Amanda multiple times after seeing her? The lack of stolen items proved that this was not a robbery. The police began to look into other motives. The forensic team searched the entire house, not just Amanda's room, for evidence. They collected fingerprints and hair, hoping to find samples left by someone outside the household. Additional evidence was collected from Nate, the person who first discovered Amanda's body. His clothing was taken to be examined for potential connections to the crime scene. Initially, Nate's clothing did not appear to be important to the police investigation because it did not contain any visible blood. However, as part of standard procedure to rule out family members as potential suspects, police sent Nate's clothing to a lab for further analysis, along with other collected evidence. Meanwhile, the police asked Mark Anderson, Amanda's father, to reveal the location of all the firearms in the house. As it turned out, the Andersons possessed an extensive collection of guns, which was not unusual for a family in Texas. They didn't actively hunt but occasionally practiced shooting. Following Mark's lead, the police discovered weapons and seized more than 10 different types of pistols and rifles, as well as several revolvers. Their informants also did not provide any clues, leaving the police without a clear lead. The police did not have many clues to identify the culprit. On September 17, 2010, the police obtained the autopsy results 2 days after Amanda's death. The report revealed that Amanda had been shot 4 times, all in the head. What's striking is that any one of these shots would have been fatal, yet the perpetrator fired 3 additional times. The bullet wounds locations on Amanda's head were also peculiar. The shots were fired from a small caliber pistol. 2 wounds were located on the top of her head, one near the right temple, and the last one on her forehead. Except for the shot to the right temple, which was fired at a 90-degree angle, all shots were directed from top to bottom. The nature of these wounds suggests that Amanda's death was more like an execution. The crime scene revealed that .22 caliber bullets were used in the shooting. The lack of gunpowder marks around Amanda's head wounds suggested the shooter was at least a yard away. Based on forensic evidence, police concluded that Amanda knew her killer. 2 key factors led to this conclusion. Amanda was sitting on her bed, working on her laptop, when she was shot, and the shooter was standing beside her. It's likely that if a stranger had entered her room, Amanda would have reacted defensively. However, she took no action, indicating she was familiar with the shooter and didn't perceive them as a threat. The police sought to identify the killer among Amanda's acquaintances by questioning her friends at college. Her best friend revealed that Amanda was cautious and didn't engage with strangers or use unknown substances. Amanda was not involved in any illegal activities. She also had no enemies at college. However, it is possible that someone was secretly following Amanda and planning an attack. In an attempt to find leads, police spoke with college security about any suspicious incidents related to Amanda or other students over the past year. Unfortunately, this did not yield any results. A week after Amanda's death, police have found no leads and have not identified any suspects. Amanda's family grieves, and they are desperate for answers about what happened. In an effort to gather more information, a reward was offered to anyone who could provide helpful leads to the investigation. The goal was to encourage someone with valuable information to come forward. The police station soon received numerous calls with tips, but most of them were unsubstantiated assumptions that only hindered the investigation. Despite the time-consuming process of verifying each lead, none of them yielded the desired outcome. Ultimately, every tip led to a dead end. The police decided to re-question the Amanda family, focusing on Amanda's personal life, as the nature and number of her wounds suggested a personal motive. Amanda's mother was baffled by the crime, describing her daughter as a devout churchgoer and excellent student who was kind to everyone. She revealed that Amanda did not have a boyfriend at the time of her death, but had been dating a friend her age for about a year. However, the relationship had ended, and as far as her mother knew, they had not seen each other since. Police were looking for Amanda's ex-boyfriend to investigate the nature of their relationship and determine whether he had any ulterior motive for harming her. Amanda's ex-boyfriend reported that he and Amanda attended some classes and occasionally went to the movies with friends, but they never dated. They spent time together on a few occasions, however, their interactions were normal. When asked about his last encounter with Amanda, he said that he saw her the day before she died. According to him, she was on her way to pick up Nate from church. This information was not valuable. Therefore, the police decided to review the case from the beginning. The police started with Nate's 911 call. During the conversation, Nate mentioned that he did not go into his sister's room and said that someone had shot Amanda. When asked if Amanda had suffered a gunshot wound, Nate replied that there was more than one wound, specifically mentioning multiple shots to her head. However, when the police arrived at the scene, they did not immediately find evidence of multiple gunshot wounds, despite their experience in such cases. Furthermore, no gun casings or bullet casings were found at the scene. This raised questions about how Nate knew his sister had been shot multiple times. Investigators concluded that it was impossible for anyone standing at the door to know that Amanda had been shot in the head, let alone the exact number of times. The police returned to Amanda's house and inspected the door that Nate said had been propped open when he arrived. Although they found some scratches, the lock showed no signs of damage. This suggested that the scene may have been staged. After the crime lab examined the weapons seized from the home, the officers believed that a .22 caliber handgun may have been used to shoot Amanda. Analyzing all the available information, the officers came to a shocking conclusion. It appeared that Amanda had died at the hands of a family member. The pistol had been hidden in a safe place, and the killer knew where it was. Furthermore, the person who shot Amanda later returned the gun to its original location. Amanda's parents were not home on the night of the murder. Her father was having dinner with a friend, and her mother was at work. Only Amanda and her 15-year-old brother, Nate, were home. Therefore, all the initial evidence pointed to Nate as the prime suspect. However, the police did not understand the motive behind the crime, especially why Nate used their father's gun to harm his sister. To gain a better understanding of the events, the police took a closer look at what happened that evening. According to Mark Anderson, he had called his daughter to remind her to pick up her mother from work. 12 minutes later, Mark received the call from Nate, who was crying and claimed that someone had shot him. What the police found surprising was that Nate had called his father before dialing 911. The police needed concrete evidence before they could file any charges. Their goal was to avoid causing further heartache to Amanda and Nate's parents. The police decided to speak with Mark Anderson without directly accusing their son. However, Nate's parents soon realized that the police suspected their son. In an effort to gather more information, the police asked Mark if Nate had recently used a .22 caliber pistol. Mark revealed that he had given the pistol to Nate a few days before Amanda's death, after which Nate had used it in the backyard for shooting practice. A subsequent search of Amanda's home led the police to the discovery of several .22 caliber shell casings in the backyard. While these casings matched the bullets found in Amanda's body, it was still possible that this was just a coincidence. More evidence was needed to establish a definitive connection. However, 2 weeks after Amanda's death, Nate's clothes, which he had been wearing when he found his sister dead, were sent to a lab for testing with luminol. The chemical reaction showed traces of blood on his clothes. A blood spatter expert concluded that Nate Anderson had either been in the room when the shooting occurred or that he had fired the fatal shots. Tests confirmed that Nate's clothes had his sister's blood on them. This raised many questions, as Nate and Amanda were known to be close and affectionate siblings. Their parents described their relationship as loving, and family photos showed the siblings getting along well. On November 10, 2010, police got a warrant for Nate Anderson. They found him in the church and arrested him for murder. Everyone familiar with the case was shocked. No one could believe that Nate would do such a thing. The trial began on October 24, 2011. It was a long and emotional road for many, especially Amanda's family. Despite the evidence against the young teen, family members vowed to stand by Nate. Nate's grandmother said that Nate knew nothing but church, school, and love, and that Nate would never hurt his sister for any reason in the world. Amanda's parents struggled to accept that their son was responsible for Amanda's death. Nate was tried as an adult. An examiner for Nate said it would be best for him to remain in juvenile court, but the judge disagreed. For the first time, the state revealed some of the evidence police found in Amanda's home after Amanda's death. Prosecutors claimed that Nate's computer showed a history of repeated visits to adult websites and drawings of violent scenes. Additionally, one of the text messages on Amanda's phone said Nate should be shot. Her friend asked, "For what?" She replied, "For putting big staples in Amanda's head and never helping around the house." Nate Anderson eventually pleaded guilty to a first-degree crime in February 2012 as part of a plea deal. Prior to his guilty plea, Nate confessed to a psychologist and then to his parents that he was responsible for Amanda's death. According to a statement released by the parents, Nate told them that he shot Amanda with a handgun found in their home. Mark Anderson, Nate's father, stated that Nate begged for forgiveness, which he granted. Stacy, Nate's mother, expressed the pain she faced. Was a loving mother to both of her children. As a result of the plea agreement, Nate was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. His attorney believed that entering into a plea agreement was in Nate's best interests, as neither Nate nor his family wanted the case to go to trial. The case of Chad Amelia. Chad Amelia was born in 1992 in Santa Clara, California, USA. His parents, of Irish descent, married young and then moved to the United States. They were eager to pursue the American dream, a common goal for millions. When they arrived in the United States, they found themselves isolated in a foreign country, with no one nearby to support them. Communication with relatives was only possible by phone. Despite the distance, the couple and their children remained determined and did not return to Ireland. Chad grew up with his younger brother Shane. They got along and supported each other from a young age. Following the example of their parents, difficulties shaped their characters, making them kind and fair. Both boys were always ready to help others in need. Chad, the eldest, was especially hardworking. He played baseball and football in high school, and when a coach noticed his talent, he was given a spot on the school team. This opportunity fueled his passion for sports, and he became a talented football player. After graduating from high school, he attended California State University, Chicago, graduating in 2018. Soon after, he joined Camarilla, an accounting firm. At the same time, he continued his studies in economics to improve his accounting skills. Known for being sociable and kind, Chad easily connects with people. One spring day in 2018, 20-year-old Chad was walking his dog in the park when he unexpectedly met Bryn Spetcher, a smart, friendly, and determined 27-year-old girl. Like Chad, Bryn is from Chicago, Illinois. She moved to Washington when she was older, making some changes to pursue her education and find a good job. Bryn was born with hearing problems and was nearly deaf from a young age, forcing her to wear a hearing aid. This made her feel out of place in the educational environment, leading to various challenges. However, it also fueled her desire to help others, as she tried to maintain a positive attitude. Despite the difficulties of moving to California, Bryn earned a degree in audiology, a significant accomplishment that she had long pursued. Her career was just beginning, and she quickly secured a position as an audiologist at a hospital in Los Angeles. She wanted to help others who, like her, faced hearing challenges. Bryn lived in California for about a year but was not sociable and often took time off from work, so she did not have a wide circle of acquaintances, communicating only with a few friends with whom she could spend weekends. Chad changed her life dramatically. They started talking and quickly realized that they had many common interests. Chad was very fond of his smart and attractive girlfriend. He often talked about her to his friends, and he expressed his happiness. She seemed pleased too, eager to share stories about him with her friends. They seemed like the perfect couple, visiting each other often. On May 27, 2018, Bryn went to her boyfriend's house, bringing along her beloved service dog, a husky guide dog. Her boyfriend, Chad, also had a dog, and the two animals got along well. The following weekend, about a month later, Bryn was planning a business trip to another city, so she wanted to spend some time relaxing with her Chad before the trip. And Chad lived in the Tarzana Oaks area of California. That evening, one of Chad's neighbors, a guy named Vinny, returned home around 2 a.m. He spent about half an hour with Chad and Bryn, who were watching their favorite TV series. Vinny then went to sleep in his room, while another neighbor slept, using earplugs and sleeping pills. That night, Bryn and Chad decided to smoke marijuana. In California, marijuana use is legal, having been legalized in 1996. Chad took a few breaths and quickly relaxed. Bryn at first, she didn't feel anything, so she tried again. This time, she felt terrible. Her mind went blank, her vision blurred, and she had trouble breathing. She told her boyfriend, who went into the kitchen to get her some water. She felt so bad that she feared for her life and asked Chad to stay with her. Chad, who had used before, didn't have the same problems and was calm enough to support her. Bryn admits that she thought she was going to die. She began hallucinating about dying in pain and felt like she wouldn't survive the night. She was angry at her boyfriend because he seemed fine and suspected that he was setting her up. In her hallucinations, he became the bad guy who orchestrated her death through drug use. She also heard voices in her head urging her to kill him, and Bryn realized that the only way she could survive was to get rid of her boyfriend. Suddenly, she stood up and went into the kitchen, where she picked up a large knife. Bryn returned to the living room, where Chad was still lying on the couch. She stabbed him multiple times in the chest. At that moment, she heard voices urging her to continue stabbing. She couldn't resist them because she felt out of control. Bryn experienced a fierce cruelty and aggression she had never felt before. The hallucinations continued, and with each stab, she felt relief. Meanwhile, the neighbors were in other rooms on the second floor. One was fast asleep and didn't hear anything. The second neighbor, Vinny, heard some rustling from downstairs, but there was no loud noise or screaming, so he didn't think much of it. Vinny assumed the couple was watching TV. After a while, he heard Chad's voice asking Bryn to leave him alone and call for help. The voice got louder and more frightening, which scared Vinny. To find out what was going on, he started going down from the first floor. When he walked in, the first thing he noticed was the frightened dogs. When he entered the room, he saw the furniture scattered everywhere. In the living room, Bryn had a knife in her hand, covered in blood. Chad lay there, wheezing, his eyes wide with horror as he looked at Vinny. Chad's hand was slashed by her, defenseless, but Bryn, in her frenzy, stabbed him with a kitchen knife. A large gash across his chest that Bryn continued to attack with a look of fury on her face. Vinny yelled at her to stop, but instead, Bryn turned to look at him with a blank expression. She was still holding the knife. Feeling the danger, Vinny quickly went upstairs and knocked on the second neighbor's door to warn him. However, the neighbor was fast asleep and did not respond. So Vinny grabbed his cell phone and ran downstairs. Fearing for his life, he ran out onto the street and quickly called 911. Once outside, Vinny used his phone to call emergency services. His screams attracted the attention of the neighbors, who ran out to see what was going on, making Vinny feel safer. He started banging on the windows and shouting for the girl to stop. The neighbors, seeing the situation inside the house, also started shouting. Everyone was scared and shocked. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, Bryn continued to attack Chad, not paying attention to the commotion outside. Within minutes, the police met Vinny, who was sobbing about the events that were happening. He could only point to the apartment where the violent attack was taking place. The police rushed into the house to intervene. In the living room, they found Bryn repeatedly stabbing a young man in the chest. The room was covered in blood, and although the young man showed no signs of life, Bryn did not stop. The police considered using force to end the attack. However, when ordered to drop the knife, Bryn began stabbing herself in the neck. The police quickly used a stun gun, but it was ineffective. Bryn continued to harm herself, so the police used a baton to disarm her. It took 9 blows to knock the knife out of her hand, even breaking her arm in several places, but she seemed completely unaware of the injuries. Only then did Bryn drop the knife. In addition to stabbing Chad, she also stabbed her dog several times. When other rescue services arrived, everyone was shocked by the horrific scene, which looked like a bloodbath. Doctors tried to resuscitate Vinny, but he was in shock and could not remember or explain what had happened in the house. The experience had a profound effect on him, and he needed a long recovery period with the help of psychologists. The dog was treated at a veterinary clinic and eventually recovered from his injuries. Unfortunately, by the time the police arrived, Chad was dead. There was a lot of blood from the stab wound, and witnesses to the incident were present. These witnesses were neighbors who had come out of the house when they heard screams. They described what they saw to the police, but could not understand how such a brutal attack could have happened or what had provoked it. Chad had 108 stab wounds, most of them concentrated around the heart and neck. Some of the wounds were superficial and not life-threatening, while others penetrated vital organs. It is difficult to determine which specific wound caused Chad's death. He also had multiple self-defense wounds. Bryn after self-inflicted wounds to her neck. She was rushed to the hospital, where she was placed on a ventilator and intubated. When police tried to communicate with her, they used only a piece of paper and a pen, as she was unable to fully respond because of the life support equipment. Once she was stabilized in the hospital, she was able to communicate fully. Various tests showed traces of mild substances in her blood. Doctors noted that the levels were very low and did not pose a threat to her life or mental health. It is unusual for such a small amount to cause such an extreme reaction. However, doctors did not rule out the possibility that her blood levels had dropped. When Bryn spoke to the police, she claimed that she did not remember anything that had happened. As a result, she did not know where Chad was or what had happened to him. She believed that her injuries may have been caused by an assault with the intent to rape her. In addition to the neck injury, she also suffered a broken neck and a bludgeoned arm, which was how the police safely disarmed her of the knife. However, she did not remember the event either. Bryn could not believe the police account of how she attacked and stabbed her boyfriend. Despite this, she did not seem to feel remorse for her actions toward Chad. Bryn refused to comment further and immediately requested a lawyer, as she considered herself innocent and blamed the incident on the effects of drugs. The last thing she remembered was being discharged from the hospital after 4 days, on May 31st, when she was immediately arrested for Chad's murder. Eventually, she was able to share a more detailed account of the events of that tragic night. Bryn recounted her story. She had gone to visit her boyfriend with a dog and they watched TV together. Around 10:30 p.m., when Chad stepped outside to smoke, she joined him, saying she wanted to try it too. She then began to feel unwell, hallucinating and hearing voices in her head. Bryn had difficulty breathing, felt disoriented and nauseous. She then had a hallucination blaming Chad for her condition. The hallucination urged her to kill Chad, claiming it was the only way to stop her bad feelings. Although she initially resisted, the hallucinations grew stronger. Feeling like she was going to die, Bryn attacked Chad with a knife but insisted that she had no control at the time, claiming she was innocent. When the police arrived, the hallucinations told her to harm herself. She complied with these voices. Bryn insisted that she could not resist because the voices in her head had complete control over her. She could not even drop the knife when the police asked her to, until they broke her arm. Bryn believed that she was suffering from drug-induced psychosis at the time. She was eventually charged with first-degree murder, but she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Preliminary hearings took place and her bail was set at $500,000, which she paid, allowing her to await trial at home. During this time, the police continued to investigate and Bryn's attorney repeatedly requested adjournments. And Chad's murder trial was set for October 23, 2023, but a new district attorney took office a month earlier, causing further delays. The trial finally began on November 9, 2023. The new prosecutor reduced her charges to manslaughter, which shocked the victim's family. They could not understand how someone could accidentally stab the victim more than 100 times. Remarkably, all of this took so long that Chad's mother did not live to see the trial and never saw justice. She passed away in 2020. The court psychiatrist concluded that Bryn suffered from a psychotic disorder caused by smoking. This decision was supported by other experts, and according to the prosecution, they did not have enough evidence to refute this conclusion. During the trial, Chad's family insisted that it was a deliberate massacre and demanded punishment. The defense argued that Bryn's behavior showed signs of psychosis. She was not aware of her actions, first stabbing her boyfriend and then hitting him multiple times. A police officer using a stun gun was unable to stop her, and they were only able to take the knife away after breaking her arm with 9 blows from her baton. This behavior showed that she was psychotic. However, according to Bryn, she understood what was happening. She remembered everything and claimed that she saw the murder as the only way to survive. She was aware of her actions and made her own decisions, despite experiencing hallucinations. Her arguments were strongly opposed by her attorneys. As a result, the defense continued to delay the trial, which lasted for 5 years. The main issues in dispute were whether there was intent to kill Chad and whether Bryn used the drug voluntarily. Under California law, a person can be held responsible for such crimes while under the influence of drugs or alcohol if it can be proven that the use was voluntary. If the drug was coerced, the killing is considered unintentional. This must be proven. The prosecution pointed to numerous letters from the girl, in which Bryn repeatedly told friends that she had been drinking. She also mentioned smoking occasionally, suggesting that this was not her first time using. The prosecution argued that on the day Chad was killed, she also used the drug voluntarily, as she had done before. Many colleagues defended Bryn, describing her as a very responsible person. She had no criminal record and no one could testify that she was capable of causing such a psychotic episode. However, this claim seems dubious, given her medical history, which should have made her aware of the potential consequences. She defended herself by saying that she was unsure what drugs her boyfriend had smoked and given her that night and believed he had given them to her intentionally. No other drugs were found in his home. Bryn's parents defended her, claiming that she had no romantic relationship with Chad and that she was acting in self-defense against harassment. They attempted to portray her as a heroine. However, friends on both sides disagreed, saying that Chad and Bryn had been together for nearly 2 months, had an intimate relationship, and that everyone knew about it. Chad's relatives denied any allegations of violence against him. They described him as respectful of women and noted that although he had a smoking habit, which his parents had advised him to quit, it was legal and had never caused any problems. They insisted he was not aggressive, so they did not believe he would attack his girlfriend. Throughout the trial, Bryn showed no remorse for what had happened. The only time she cried was when the brutal details of her arrest were described. She could recall the intense pain of being beaten with a baton. The case was complex, controversial, and attracted considerable public attention. Many were puzzled as to how a seemingly kind-hearted girl, dedicated to helping others, could commit a brutal murder. The jury then deliberated on the verdict. The jury then found Bryn Spejcher, 32, guilty of manslaughter. Bryn showed emotion for the second time during the trial. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. At that point, she was focused only on her sentence. She did not care that she had caused serious harm to her loved one. Bryn simply did not want to take responsibility for her actions. Chad's father spoke to reporters, expressing his frustration with the justice system's decision, which he considered unfair. He also pointed to inconsistencies in Bryn's testimony. She contradicted herself. For example, she initially described her boyfriend as a nice young man who was easy to talk to. However, when the subject of smoking was brought up, Bryn admitted that she had always been afraid of him and then began to deny that they had a relationship. Chad's father said that Bryn did not want to take responsibility for her terrible actions and tried to blame Chad for the bloody massacre to reduce her sentence. The father could not believe that the court would seriously consider that a person could accidentally inflict more than 100 wounds on another person. His son's death was not simple or painless. Chad had suffered a lot, and now the killer was trying to blame him with lies. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Bryn smoked of her own free will, and Chad had never forced her to take drugs when she did not like them. However, psychiatric experts confirmed that Bryn's psychosis was caused by the drug. This was one of the first cases where a voluntary user was justified in using drugs. And while awaiting the verdict, the girl was released on bail. On January 24, 2024, Bryn Spejcher was sentenced to 2 years of probation in order to complete 100 hours of community service. The judge justified the lenient sentence by stating that Bryn was not in control of his actions during a psychotic episode, making a reduced sentence appropriate. The attorney applauded the court's decision, calling it the right thing to do. However, Chad's father was unhappy with the ruling, arguing that the judge had set a dangerous precedent. He said the decision implied that marijuana users in California were being given a license to kill. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965 in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, to Cyrus and Melanie Spencer. Growing up, he enjoyed active games and sports, which helped him develop a strong physique. During his high school years, Frank excelled as a member of the wrestling team and showed exceptional leadership abilities. After graduating from high school in 1984, Frank continued his studies at a local university and completed his studies in 1988. After the death of his father, Frank took over the family business, becoming the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars. An important event in the young man's life took place in 1997, when he met Maria through a mutual friend, Paul Siciliano. Frank Spencer and Maria immediately became close, attracted to each other's dynamic personalities. Maria was known for her hot temper, strong will and bold personality, and was also extremely affectionate. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's father, Anthony Rocco, did not approve of Frank and even tried to prevent their marriage. Frank's family was also unhappy with his choice. Due to the opposition of both families, the couple decided to elope and rent an apartment. Eventually, their families were forced to accept their feelings. Maria and Frank got married and started a family, having a son and a daughter. They moved to a new house, and Frank worked hard to provide for his family through his auto parts business and sponsorship of racing cars. As the head of the family, his children became his top priority and motivation. However, Maria's priorities were different. She doesn't take care of her family, she's cold to the kids. Unlike her husband, she's not passionate about the marriage. She loves to spend what Frank earns, and what really worries her is money. Maria's behavior increasingly caused problems in their marriage. Frank became increasingly dissatisfied with her selfishness and eccentric behavior. He felt that as a mother, she should grow up and think of others. However, Maria did not change. In 2006, he filed for divorce, fed up with his wife's inappropriate behavior. Sometimes she behaved so irrationally that Frank feared for the children's health. At that time, the idea of divorce seemed like the only right solution. However, the confrontation became more tense as Frank sought to gain custody of the children. He did not trust his ex-wife Maria and believed that she was not capable of properly caring for the children. However, not everyone agreed with his stance. His friend Ron argued that both parents were necessary for the healthy development of the children and advised Frank to negotiate a joint custody agreement with Maria. Despite this, Frank was adamant about pursuing sole custody, believing he knew what was best. In response, Maria also pushed for sole custody and was expecting to receive a substantial child support payment. Their conflict, which grew over time, on several occasions, Maria's erratic behavior led to her attacking him and the children. Frank had to call the police. However, some people did not believe Frank. And an incident that happened in 2008 proved his testimony to be true. An argument broke out between Maria and her ex-mother-in-law near her children's school, leading to Maria's arrest. The problem started when Maria went to pick up her daughter, but Frank's mother intervened, trying to stop her. It was later revealed that there was an agreement between the two. Frank's mother would be the one to pick up the children that day. But Maria changed her mind at the last minute, deliberately taking the children away. After the fight, Maria picked up the child and put her in the car, but did not put her in a seatbelt. The police stopped the car and determined that Maria's actions endangered the child's life and health. As a result, Maria faced charges of disorderly conduct. Furthermore, her ex-husband, Frank, accused her of stalking, claiming that she had followed him on multiple occasions. However, the prosecution could not prove that the child's life was in danger, so the police offered Maria a deal. They would drop the child endangerment charges if she pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria accepted the deal, pleading guilty and being fined $600. Despite this, Maria did not change her behavior. Instead, she became more outrageous after the incident. Frank's acquaintances and relatives grew increasingly concerned as he shared his complaints about Maria. She began to threaten and her stalking behavior continued. Several of Maria's co-workers later revealed that she often expressed deep hatred for Frank, even stating that she was willing to end his life. This led one co-worker to jokingly call her the Black Widow. Despite the tension, Frank tried to stay calm and resolve the situation amicably. He tried to reason with Maria several times, but she refused to stop her behavior. As a precaution, Frank began to record their conflicts. His intention was not to get Maria into legal trouble, but to have evidence in case things escalated further. Frank just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria's actions continued to cross the line. By 2009, the Frank's divorce proceedings had dragged on for a long time, with the children staying with their father, Frank. Meanwhile, Frank had begun dating a woman named Julie Dent. Although Maria claimed that she did not mind Frank's new relationship, she was said to have been upset by Julie's closeness to the children. Frank believed that Maria's jealousy was the root cause of the troubles. Maria's anger grew, and in February 2009, She left a voicemail warning Julie to stay away from her children. However, the situation really escalated when Maria's father, Rocco, was released from prison after 5 years for fraud. Frank knew of his ex-father-in-law's reputation and feared more trouble, believing that Maria had inherited her father's erratic temperament. At this point, those around Frank noticed that he was becoming increasingly anxious. After Rocco is released, a robbery occurs at Frank's office, where important documents related to the divorce proceedings are stolen. The next day, Maria contacts Frank, saying that she discovered a trash bag containing interesting items on the porch. Frank understands the implication and advises her to return the stolen items. He also reports the break-in to the police, but despite their best efforts, they are unable to prove that anyone was involved in the incident. According to the police, no evidence of the perpetrators was found. However, it is clear that Maria and her father had a motive for the crime. The investigation considered Maria a suspect, but the case was eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. The police's efforts led Maria to return the documents she had taken from Frank, as these documents did not contain any important information that could be used as evidence in court. The situation continued to worsen until it reached a breaking point. Maria began sending threats to Frank's new girlfriend, Julie, on social media. She was still upset that the children were still in contact with Julie. Unlike Maria, Julie remained calm and enjoyed spending time with Frank and the children. She tried not to get involved in a complicated relationship between Frank and his ex-wife, but Julie was deeply troubled and Maria prioritized revenge over parental responsibility. The disputes between Frank and his ex-wife Maria continued until 2010, when Frank finally lost patience. He went to the police and asked them to evaluate Maria's behavior, providing their correspondence as evidence. The correspondence contained indirect threats, but Maria claimed that this was her way of communicating and that she had no intention of causing harm. Once again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings sounded vague. This time, Maria was not punished. In January 2010, Frank and Julie planned a romantic getaway to the Caribbean, but on the eve of the trip, a fire broke out at his mother's house. Although no one was injured, the house was devastated by flames and smoke. Witnesses reported that Maria drove up to the scene with her neighbors and acquaintances, smiled at the fire, and drove away. After firefighters extinguished the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found in the ashes. The incident became so serious that Frank had to call the police again, as it became clear that the fire was no accident. Maria's actions had escalated to the point where it was clear that she would not stop until she achieved her goal. The police found no evidence of arson in the first fire, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria later sent Frank a text message in which she gloated about what had happened, and wrote about how karma had caught up with him, and that since her life had been ruined, he could expect more consequences. When the police took no action, Maria became bolder and began openly threatening Frank and his new partner Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. Fortunately, she was able to escape by jumping from the porch. But her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. Frank invited Julie to move in with him, although he was concerned that this would anger Maria further, but they had no choice. At the same time, an investigation into the cause of the fire was underway. Since Julie's home was in a different district, she and Frank hoped that the police investigation would be fair. However, the police were unable to help due to lack of evidence, and the fire was ruled an accident. Despite this, Julie was determined to get to the bottom of the matter and appealed to her superiors. This prompted the investigation. Unexpectedly, flares were found in Julie's backyard. Further investigation revealed another flare that could have caused the fire. In addition, experts determined that the steps on the roof of the house had been doused with a flammable mixture. Ultimately, after all the tests and examinations, the cause of the fire was determined to be arson. However, as in previous cases, no one was directly implicated in the crime due to lack of evidence. And those responsible were able to avoid punishment once again. In the summer of 2012, Frank and Julie made a plan to pretend to break up to distract Maria. However, the expected peace did not last long, when Frank's body was discovered on July 3rd, just a few weeks after the couple broke up. When Joe, a friend of Frank's, decided to visit Frank because he had not heard from him recently, when Joe arrived at the bungalow, he felt increasingly worried. The front door was slightly open and there were stains near the entrance. When he entered the house, he saw Frank lying on the floor, dead. Joe moved closer and noticed dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, he called the emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, people suspected they knew who was responsible for this heinous crime. Police found several key pieces of evidence at the scene, including large pools of blood, extensive drag marks, clear shoe prints on the floor, and bloody gloves in the kitchen. These were sent for analysis, which revealed that the shoe prints matched the size and style of shoes worn by Maria's father, Rocco. Additionally, Maria's skin particles were discovered inside the gloves, although she had not lived with Frank for over a year, making it unlikely that the gloves had been left behind by accident. The evidence linked Rocco and Maria to the crimes, leading to their arrests. An autopsy and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with two different types of guns. He was initially shot with a .30 caliber sniper rifle while standing near the front door. A sniper's nest was discovered approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through Frank's hand and into his chest, severing a vital artery and causing a fatal wound. However, the attackers continued to attack. They dragged Frank into the house, where a second shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already dead, so the final shot was considered an act of revenge. The violent nature of the crime suggests that the shooter had a deep hatred for Frank. Based on this evidence, police suspect that Rocco fired the first shot from the sniper rifle, while Maria fired the last shot. Additionally, police discovered that Frank's car and dog were missing from the house. A review of traffic camera footage showed that Frank's car had been driven away from his home onto an interstate. However, the identity of the driver could not be determined. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. 2 days after the incident, Frank's dog was found at a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately recognized the dog as well-groomed, with an electronic chip, and the dog was returned to Frank's mother. It turned out that Frank had acquired a new pet for his children after a fire. This lucky discovery helped to clarify some aspects and effectively expose the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog with them when they fled the scene. On the way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by the smell of food nearby, the dog escaped. It then went to a house where a wedding was taking place. This allowed the police to prove that Rocco's phone was near the wedding venue on the day of the murder, while his Harrisburg residence was 12 miles away, contradicting his claim that he was at home. It is likely that Maria was the one who came up with the idea of bringing the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rocco admitted that his son-in-law had asked him for help several times and had visited him the day before his death, which would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony did not sound sincere, and no one could confirm whether the men were on good terms. Rocco confessed that Frank had given him the car that same day, likely in an attempt to justify the finding of his fingerprints in the victim's home. By making this statement, Rocco inadvertently admitted to having been present at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Rocco's and Maria's homes for the murder weapon, but no weapon was found, as it was likely that Rocco had thrown it away. Maria also denied any guilt, claiming that the glove had accidentally appeared in Frank's home, possibly brought there by the children. Ultimately, the suspects were released to go home. However, the police continued to collect evidence necessary for the case. The police found a new lead when Derek Reed, a friend of Frank's, spoke to Maria at a school football game. Maria revealed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This new information caught the attention of the state attorney general, who was already unhappy with the way the police handled Frank's reports. Many people also complained about the matter, and an internal investigation was launched. However, it was difficult to prove that the police had neglected their duties. The police claimed that much of the information Frank provided lacked concrete evidence. The police attempted to determine the guilt of the suspects in the case, as well as their involvement in previous crimes, including stalking. And the major interrogation took place in 2013. Maria and Rocco maintained their innocence throughout the process, denying all 12 charges against them. However, their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors said that Maria and Rocco arrived at Frank's house together, deliberately not using their own car to avoid attention, instead fleeing the scene in a victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. Meanwhile, Rocco escaped. After a final interrogation, he boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. Police considered his actions an escape attempt and evidence of his guilt. For nearly a year, Rocco evaded arrest, but was finally arrested in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was arrested by local police, and Rocco attempted to fight deportation back to the United States. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was returned to his homeland to face justice. In the fall of 2015, Maria went to trial. Throughout the proceedings, she maintained her innocence and instead blamed her father for the crimes. Maria claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, many witnesses came forward to reveal her true nature, sharing accounts of persistent threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted more than a week, after which the jury returned a verdict, finding Maria Spencer guilty on all charges. These included murder, arson, burglary, conspiracy, and menacing. As a result, Maria was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 50 years. Court observers said Maria smiled throughout the trial. In a later interview, she explained her behavior, saying, "Because I didn't end his life, I tried to stay positive." A few years later, Rocco's trial began. He was furious about his daughter's accusations. Rocco claimed he was only trying to help his daughter and opposed violence. He wanted to say that Maria was the one who encouraged the crime. Despite his claims, physical evidence showed that Rocco was more involved than he let on. In the fall of 2018, Rocco Franklin was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, Rocco, 77, blew a kiss to the prosecutor and police, then cursed the judge. Years later, Rocco asked for a retrial, arguing that his defense attorney had been ineffective in his conviction. Maria also tried to appeal her case, but both father and son were unsuccessful. The case of Heidi Furcus. Heidi Marie Eriksson was born on December 14, 1984, to John and Elinda Eriksson, and was the youngest of their 3 children and their only daughter. She was known for her playful and artistic nature, and lived her life to the fullest. After graduating from high school in 2003, she continued her education at the University of Northwestern in Roseville. During this time, she was a regular attendee at Calvary Church in the city, where she had been involved since her early years. It was at Calvary Church that she met Nick Furcus, with whom she shared the role of youth group leaders. serving their community with dedication and passion. Nicholas Firkus was born on February 25, 1983, to Julie and Steve Firkus. He was a driven and ambitious young man who dedicated himself to his work as the director of operations at a reputable carpet cleaning company. Known for his well-rounded personality and strong work ethic, he had found his true match in Heidi, whom he met at their shared place of worship, Calvary Church, in 2005. At the ages of 22 and 20, respectively, Nick and Heidi made the joyful decision to take their relationship to the next level. Surrounded by their loved ones and the familiar walls of the church that had witnessed the blossoming of their love, they exchanged vows, sealing their commitment to each other. To their friends and community, Nick and Heidi's marriage appeared perfect. They shared a love for travel, biking, and their church. They often hosted dinner parties for their loved ones. Heidi had recently started working at a financial firm where her father was employed. Their bond seemed to be growing stronger with time. However, behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. On the morning of April 25, 2010, Heidi called 911 from her home in St. Paul, Minnesota, reporting a break-in. Only 38 seconds into the call, Heidi yelled no, and a gunshot was heard. 65 seconds later, Nick used Heidi's phone to contact the dispatcher, saying, "Please, someone just broke into my house and shot me and my wife." Nick was overcome with grief, repeatedly crying and begging for help, saying, "Oh my Heidi, my wife is dead, please get here." He also shouted no in despair. When the police arrived, they found Heidi unresponsive on the kitchen floor with a gunshot wound to her back. Nick was beside her, still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, despite having been shot in the upper left leg. He was extremely upset and told the police that one or two intruders had broken into their home. According to Nick, he had grabbed his shotgun and tried to escape with Heidi through the back door, heading towards their detached garage. However, the intruder managed to take the shotgun from him and shot both Nick and Heidi. Sadly, Heidi was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short by the tragic events. Nick, meanwhile, was rushed to the hospital for treatment and was later questioned by the police while still in the hospital. Police asked Nick why he and Heidi left the safety of their bedroom to face the potential danger. Nick explained that they were trying to escape through the back door. After receiving medical treatment for his wounds at the hospital, Nick was released just 3 hours later and was interviewed again at the police station about the incident. At the police station, Nick provided a detailed account of what happened. He recalled watching a movie with Heidi and having a glass of wine before going to bed around midnight. Nick said he woke up around 6:10 to 6:15 a.m. when he heard the screen door open and someone fiddling with the doorknob. The investigators questioned Nick about locking the deadbolt, and he admitted that he and Heidi usually made sure to lock it, but he believed he had forgotten to do so that particular night. After hearing the noises, Nick retrieved his shotgun from the upstairs closet, which he had brought up from the basement a month ago because he noticed it was starting to rust. Although the shotgun was initially empty, Nick loaded it when he heard the noises. He then woke up Heidi, instructed her to call 911, and told her to leave the house and go to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick also shared that he and Heidi had a safety plan in place in case of trouble, which was to go to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick, who is right-handed, was holding a pair of jeans in his right hand and a shotgun in his left hand as he walked behind Heidi toward the garage. They stopped at the front door, where Heidi retrieved her wallet from a table. Suddenly, the door burst open and a tall, dark-skinned man rushed in. The intruder wore a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled tightly around his face. Nick dropped the jeans, and the intruder grabbed the shotgun barrel. The two men then engaged in a physical struggle. During the altercation, the gun fired, and Nick said his finger accidentally slipped onto the trigger. He believed he hit Heidi in the back, causing her to collapse immediately. They continued fighting over the shotgun, which fired again, hitting Nick in the upper thigh and causing him to fall to the ground. The intruder then fled out the front door. Nick told investigators that Heidi was unresponsive, and he eventually lost consciousness. Nick told the police that his house was supposed to be foreclosed the next day, and he and his partner Heidi had planned to inform their parents and friends about their situation on the same day. According to Nick, they had fallen behind on their bills, and their house had been foreclosed on and sold to someone else. As a result, they were required to vacate the premises, but they hadn't shared this information with anyone. Their plan was to pack up their belongings on Sunday and Monday morning, leaving some items in the garage to collect later, and then find someone to stay with temporarily. However, their plans were disrupted, and their peaceful home was left with an air of tragedy. The lives of Nick and Heidi were forever changed by the devastating events of that morning. The investigation continued, with law enforcement securing the area and interviewing residents. None of the neighbors reported seeing anyone leaving the Furcus residence. However, one neighbor, Brendan O'Connell, who was looking after kittens in a nearby house, told the authorities that he heard an argument followed by gunfire. Nick begged for mercy, claiming a shooter had attacked him and a woman. After talking to police, Nick's lawyer hired an artist to update the sketch, details emerging: an African-American male, 40 to 60 years old. The police initially searched for an unknown African-American male intruder based on Nick's description, but found no evidence or witnesses to support his story. Despite a thorough investigation, no one was arrested or charged in connection with Heidi's death, leaving the case unsolved for many years. Years later, a surprising revelation came to light. Over 10 years had passed since Heidi's murder, and Nick had seemingly moved on with his life, marrying Rachel and starting a family. However, when financial troubles resurfaced, Rachel began to suspect that Nick was hiding something. Rachel's concerns about their financial situation and Nick's evasiveness sparked her curiosity, prompting her to investigate Nick's past. As she dug deeper, she uncovered secrets and inconsistencies that made her question everything she thought she knew about her husband and his possible involvement in Heidi's death. Rachel was unaware of the financial troubles her husband Nick was hiding, similar to those he had faced with his previous wife Heidi years earlier. Her concerns prompted her to contact the authorities, which renewed interest in Heidi's murder case. Investigators began looking into Nick's second marriage to Rachel, whom he married in 2012. However, by the time Rachel spoke with the authorities, she had already divorced Nick due to his growing financial problems. Before their 2019 divorce, Rachel had recorded a conversation where she confronted Nick about his deception. She told investigators that Nick was repeating the same patterns he had with Heidi, including failing to pay property taxes. In fact, she had seen a letter warning that they would be evicted by 2020 if the taxes weren't paid. Rachel's decision to contact the police with her suspicions set off a chain of events that would once again bring the Heidi Fergus murder case into the spotlight. Sergeant Nicole Sipes, assigned to the case, listened carefully to Rachel's concerns and began re-examining the evidence. Sergeant Nicole Sipes of the St. Paul Police Department was determined to solve Heidi's murder. To uncover the truth, she made a bold decision to ask the FBI to analyze the 911 call audio recordings. She hoped to find crucial clues that could explain what happened on the night of the murder. The FBI's analysis yielded a surprising result. It found no evidence of a third person being present during the incident. This discovery contradicted the husband's earlier statement to the police, leaving Sergeant Sipes and her team puzzled. If only Heidi and her husband were in the house, what led to her death? The absence of a third person increased suspicion around the husband's possible involvement in the crime. Sergeant Sipes was more determined than ever to uncover the truth and bring justice to Heidi and her grieving family. The FBI's findings opened up a new avenue of investigation, which Sergeant Sipes was committed to pursuing with increased intensity. The investigators obtained financial documents that disputed Nicholas Fergus's earlier statements, further implicating him in Heidi's murder. Fergus's account of the events surrounding Heidi's death kept changing. Initially, he claimed that an intruder took his gun and shot both him and Heidi. Later, he said that the intruder didn't take the gun, but his own finger accidentally pulled the trigger, hitting Heidi in the back. The crime scene investigation yielded no signs of a struggle, such as overturned furniture or marks on the walls, contradicting Fergus's account. Forensic analysis of the scene also disputed Fergus's version of the shooting, particularly the trajectory of the bullet that struck Heidi. Furthermore, Heidi's 911 call made no mention of an intruder, and there was no evidence of a break-in or intruder at the crime scene. This lack of evidence led investigators to suspect that Fergus had planned to cover up his involvement in Heidi's death. As a result, an arrest warrant was issued for Nick Fergus on May 19, 2021, over a decade after Heidi's death. A SWAT team arrested Fergus at his home in Mounds View. The surprise arrest of Nick stemmed from Rachel's suspicions and the tireless efforts of Police Sergeant Nicole Sipes. This sudden development astonished many who thought the case had stalled and would never reach a resolution. As the legal proceedings progressed, the case details would be re-examined, and the truth about that fateful night would gradually emerge. At the trial, Nick Fergus maintained that he was innocent and pleaded not guilty. Many of his family members, including his father, claimed to believe in his innocence, stating that Nick's love for Heidi would have prevented him from committing such a violent act. However, the jury disagreed with their assessment. On February 10, 2023, the jury delivered a shocking verdict after deliberating for 10 hours. They found Nick, the person Heidi trusted most, guilty of her brutal murder. This outcome left everyone who knew Heidi in a state of shock and disbelief. The prosecution built a strong case against Nick by showing that he was facing severe financial difficulties, which they argued led him to kill Heidi to avoid shame and conflict. They questioned the truth of Nick's claim that a home invader was responsible, suggesting that he fabricated the story to divert attention from himself. The prosecution presented convincing evidence, including the lack of signs of forced entry and inconsistencies in Nick's account. Notably, there was no DNA or physical evidence to support the presence of an intruder, which raised serious doubts about Nick's story. Prosecutor Rachel Craker argued that Nick's inability to accept the truth of his financial deception led him to commit a shocking crime, sacrificing Heidi's life to preserve his reputation. In contrast, Nick's defense attorney, Robert Richmond, countered that it didn't make sense for Nick's financial problems to suddenly drive him to murder. Nick claimed that killing his wife would somehow boost his reputation, but this statement is illogical. After intense debates during the trial, the jury finally reached a verdict that would determine whether Nick would be held accountable for Heidi's death. The jury carefully considered the evidence, emotional testimonies, and legal arguments before delivering a unanimous verdict. Nick Fergus was guilty of first-degree murder. On April 13, 2023, the judge handed down the most severe sentence possible: life in prison without parole. Although found guilty, Nick still insists he had nothing to do with Heidi's death. He maintains his innocence even after being sentenced. When he was sentenced, Nick said, "I understand the pain and loss felt by everyone here today. Justice has been served, but it came at a great cost. A broken family, a betrayed community, and a life cut short." The verdict brought a sense of closure to Heidi's family and friends, but it also left them with the painful realization that the man they thought they knew was capable of such a heinous act. So, you must be thinking, where is Nick now? Nick is currently serving his life sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility located in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Here's what drove Nick to commit the tragic act. The motive behind the killing remains unclear, but there are clues. In June 2009, Nick received foreclosure papers on their house, which was then sold at a sheriff's auction the same month. 10 months before Heidi's death, eviction proceedings began in February 2010, with a hearing scheduled for March 8, 2010. Nick attended the hearing alone. Initially, the lockout was set for April 9, 2010, but Nick called the attorneys, claiming his grandmother was in the hospital and about to die. He requested the lockout be rescheduled for April 26, 2010. However, investigators found no evidence to support this claim. When questioned, Nick said Heidi was aware of their financial troubles and that they had made plans together to move out of their foreclosed home and start fresh elsewhere. The truth behind a tragic event was finally revealed by prosecutors. A husband, Nick, had been hiding their severe financial struggles from his wife, Heidi. Tragically, before she could discover the truth, he took her life. Instead of being honest with his wife and working together to find a solution, Nick chose a devastating path. According to prosecutors, Nick's motive for killing his wife was his shame and fear of revealing their financial problems, which included $118,000 in credit card debt and 22 months of late mortgage payments. By killing Heidi, Nick avoided confronting the consequences of his own deception. In the end, justice was served, but Heidi's loved ones still suffered immense pain and loss. Unfortunately, no legal punishment could undo the harm or bring back the vibrant life that was cruelly taken. The case of Jolene Cummings. The disappearance of 33-year-old Jolene Cummings shocked even seasoned detectives. Jolene, a mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was going through a divorce from her husband Jason. While Jolene and their children resided in a Fernandina Beach house, Jason moved to a neighboring city and had weekend visitations with the kids. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, Jolene worked until 5 p.m. The next day, Mother's Day, was also her 34th birthday. Her children had spent the previous days with their father. As agreed, Jolene was to meet Jason on Sunday in Hilliard at the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot to pick up the children. Jason brought the kids, but Jolene failed to appear. All attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Her mother, Ann Johnson, who wanted to wish Jolene a happy birthday, couldn't contact her either, as all calls went straight to voicemail. After trying to reach Jolene to no avail, Jason contacted Ann to inquire about the children. Upon learning that Jolene hadn't picked up the kids, Ann grew concerned, as this behavior was unusual for her daughter. When Ann couldn't get in touch with Jolene on Monday, May 14th, she filed a missing person report with the police. The authorities promptly launched an investigation, releasing a poster with Jolene's photo and issuing an all-points bulletin for her 2006 Ford Expedition. Ann Johnson made a public plea for help in finding her daughter, urging anyone with information to come forward. Jolene's disappearance was devastating for Ann, and she begged anyone with knowledge to report it. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest near Jolene's home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The salon where Jolene worked was closed on Sunday and Monday. The police discovered that Jolene was last seen on Saturday, May 12th, when she left work. According to the salon's owner, Jolene and Jennifer, another hairdresser, were scheduled to work together that day. In a phone call, Jennifer told her boss that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. and each drove away in their own cars. The police determined that Jolene last used her phone to make an outgoing call while still at work on May 12th. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper appealed to anyone who was a customer of Tangle's salon or in the area on May 12th to contact the police. Jolene's relatives and friends didn't think she was hiding on her own accord. The owner of the salon, where Jolene had worked for 6 years, shared their skepticism. It was hard for them to believe that she would abandon her children. The police were determined to uncover at least one lead, so they delved into Jolene's personal life. As spouses often become hostile during divorce and child custody disputes, they took a closer look at Jason. Meanwhile, Detectives found that just 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor had reported a loud argument to the police. It emerged that Jolene had been fighting with her ex-boyfriend, Jason G., and their children were witnesses to the altercation. He had asked Jolene if he could stay with her for a while, but she refused. Enraged, he began vandalizing everything in sight. The reason for her refusal was that the police were actively searching for Jason due to his parole violations. By the time the police arrived, Jason had managed to flee the scene. After Jolene disappeared, Jason G. became a person of interest in the police investigation. 2 days into the investigation, on May 15, 2018, the police found Jason G. hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day Jolene's neighbor reported a loud quarrel to the police. He was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the conversation, Jason G. claimed he was not involved in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police discovered their first crucial lead. They found Jolene Cummings's SUV parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle was undamaged and showed no signs of a struggle. On May 15th, the police visited the salon where Jolene worked, as it was the first working day after a 2-day break. They arrived at 10 a.m. to speak with Jennifer Seibert, an employee who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene and to have closed the salon with her before the weekend. However, Jennifer failed to show up for work, citing an urgent matter in another city. CCTV footage provided crucial clues about Jolene's disappearance. The footage revealed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where the police later found it. Notably, Jennifer Seibert had stated that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. on May 12th, but the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13th, a time gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. Jennifer visited a gas station across the street from her location. Surveillance footage from the station reveals that she entered the premises, purchased a bottle of water, and requested an employee to call a taxi for her, which later took her to her workplace, a salon. The gas station employee reported to the police that Jennifer appeared agitated and had fresh facial abrasions. As a result, Jennifer Seibert became the primary suspect in the investigation, and the police launched a search for her. Upon verifying the address she provided when applying for her job, the detectives discovered it was fictitious. Jennifer attempted to evade capture, but her efforts were unsuccessful. On May 16th, patrol officers spotted a black Kia Soul belonging to Jennifer, parked in a recreation area between 2 trucks, approximately 50 meters from her salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers found Jennifer asleep inside. They arrested her and initially charged her with stealing Jolene Cummings's car. When the police took her to the station, detectives noticed the abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain how she got them. She said she had been bitten by bed bugs. The police found out that she didn't have a permanent place to live, mostly sleeping in her car and using a shower at a fitness center. After her arrest, the investigators made a surprising discovery. Jennifer Seibert wasn't her real name. Her real name was Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968, and she had been reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. The name Jennifer Marie Seibert belonged to a 13-year-old girl who died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Butler Cemetery, Pennsylvania. During a videotaped interview 48 hours later, Kimberly Kessler, seated on a couch and wearing an orange jumpsuit, calmly revealed her true identity. "When you run my fingerprints, they'll come up as Kimberly Lee Kessler. I'm 50 years old, and I've been on the run for over 25 years." The police investigation into the case revealed more about Kimberly Kessler's past. It emerged that she had begun using other people's names in 1996 while living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler had used at least 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these names were similar, and she had taken at least half of them from gravestones and cemeteries. later obtaining fake documents to support these identities. One of the identities she used was Jennifer Seibert. In 2012, Connie Kessler, Kimberly's mother, contacted the police to report her daughter missing, despite not having heard from her since 2004. This delay in reporting her daughter's disappearance, 8 years after losing contact, suggests that the family relationships were strained. The Pennsylvania police investigated Kimberly Kessler's disappearance and determined that she was voluntarily missing, but the reasoning behind this conclusion is unclear. It is unknown whether a further investigation was conducted. Had the police found her, they likely would have discovered that she had assumed someone else's identity. Several questions remain unanswered. Why did Kessler flee, and why did she use multiple aliases? According to Connie Kessler, her daughter faced numerous challenges, including an abusive relationship with a man in 2004. Kimberly gave birth to a son, Evan, but when the relationship ended, the father took custody and prohibited Kimberly from seeing her child. The father later relocated to another state and falsely told Kimberly that their 1-year-old son had passed away. Kimberly sought to uncover the truth and locate the grave of her son. Frustrated by the lack of answers, she began searching for Evan and investigating his fate. Connie Kessler theorizes that her daughter used aliases to conceal her identity, fearing Evan's father. According to Tim Edwards, Evan's father, the circumstances were different. He claims to have had a relationship with Melissa McKernan between 1997 and 1999, resulting in the birth of their son Evan. Melissa allegedly used fake names to keep her family, including her mother, from finding her. After the couple separated, Melissa retained custody of Evan, denying Tim visitation rights. In 1999, when Evan was around 15 months old, social services intervened, taking Evan away from Melissa, who then fled the city, disappearing from Tim's life. Tim never informed Kimberly that Evan had passed away since he lost contact with Melissa after she left, and never heard from her again. Later, when Jolene vanished, Evan was 20 years old and had never seen a picture of his biological mother, until FBI agents visited their home in 2018 to gather information about Kimberly Kessler's past. However, there are inconsistencies in these stories. According to Tim Edwards' birth certificate, Evan was born in 1998, but in her interview, Connie Kessler claimed Kimberly gave birth to Evan in 2004. This discrepancy suggests that Connie Kessler was not well informed about her daughter's life, and her statement about Tim hiding Evan from his mother may not be reliable. As a result, Connie's theory that her daughter used the identities of deceased individuals to find her son and avoid detection by his father is questionable. Moreover, Kimberly was unable to provide coherent reasons to the detectives about why she needed to use multiple names. Now, let's revisit the Jolene Cummings case. After uncovering the fact that Kimberly Kessler had been living under assumed identities, the police brought forgery charges against her. A storage unit rented by Kessler was searched, yielding several significant finds, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 severed hair tails, and 3 mobile phones. However, the most critical piece of evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings' DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Furthermore, during a search of Kessler's vehicle, the police found scissors with Jolene's DNA on them. Notably, the blue plastic containers found at the scene will prove to be important later on. The phone seized from Kessler revealed a disturbing search history. It suggested that what happened to Jolene Cummings was not an accident, but rather something Kessler had been preparing for. On April 30th, 2018, at 3:36 a.m., Kessler searched for information on a man who was charged with murder after his co-worker's remains were found in his yard. This was followed by a search on May 8th at 1:37 a.m. for cases where a co-worker was found guilty of murder, but the body was never found. Later that day, at 7:13 a.m., Kessler searched for advice on injecting and how to use a tourniquet. She also looked up a list of female murderers by country on a website called Murderpedia, as well as a list of female murderers in Florida. Finally, She searched for information on autopsy and post-mortem changes at 6:33 p.m. The owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked reported that the plant in the pot inside the salon had been replaced. This draws attention to Kessler's search queries on May 13th, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids. At 12:05 p.m., Kessler searched for indoor palm and then variation palm tree. A minute later, at 12:06 p.m., the police examined CCTV footage from a hypermarket selling household goods, located a few hundred yards from the Tangles hair salon. The footage showed Kessler arriving at the hypermarket on May 14th at 2:39 p.m. and leaving the store half an hour later with a plant, which would later end up at the hair salon on May 15th at 6:13 p.m. 2 days later, on May 16th at 6:27 p.m., Kessler searched online for Jolene Cummings' I Have Vanished and No Body, No Crime. Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to investigate the hair salon, and their findings suggested that a serious crime had taken place there. The entire room glowed under the ultraviolet light, indicating the presence of blood or other bodily fluids. On May 22nd, the sheriff held a press conference, during which he announced, "We have gathered sufficient evidence, although some of it will remain undisclosed for the time being to protect the ongoing investigation. Sadly, our evidence leads us to conclude that Jolene Cummings has likely died." The investigators learned that, about a week before her disappearance, Jolene shared her suspicions with a colleague at the Tangle salon. She thought their new hairdresser, Jennifer, was hiding something and wasn't being genuine. According to some salon clients, the relationship between Jolene and Jennifer was strained. One client even witnessed a heated argument between the two women on May 9th, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangle hair salon closed its doors on June 5th, 2018. Despite Kessler's attorneys managing to keep some evidence under wraps, the police released information sheds light on what happened to Jolene Cummings. However, a surveillance camera near the back of the building captured footage of the dumpster. Kessler was seen there at least 4 times. The recording shows Kessler doing something near the dumpster. Later, at 8:08 a.m., she returns to dispose of a white garbage bag. Based on how she lifts the bag, it appears to be quite heavy. 14 minutes later, she throws out another white bag. In the 4th recording, taken an hour before midnight, Kessler is seen lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting that it holds something heavy. The Walmart camera footage provides insight into what Kessler threw away. The recording shows her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning agents, latex gloves, and notably, an electric knife. This discovery significantly impacted the police's subsequent actions. In July 2018, investigators discovered that a local waste management company had been dumping trash in a Georgia landfill. A team of nearly 200 people combed through the landfill for a week, yielding several crucial leads, although the sheriff refused to disclose them to protect the integrity of the investigation. Near the dumpster, where Kessler had discarded the white garbage bags, police recovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container. Notably, the container was identical to one found in Kessler's storage unit, and it tested positive for Jolene Cummings' DNA. While Jolene's body remained unfound, the accumulated evidence was sufficient to warrant Kessler's arrest for her murder. On January 17, 2019, Kimberly Kessler made her first court appearance, entering a not guilty plea. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to the judge's concerns about Kessler's mental stability. During this time, Kessler engaged in a hunger strike, which left her weighing under 88 pounds. Her court appearances were often marked by outbursts of anger. Before the 2021 court session, Kessler underwent compulsory treatment, which ultimately deemed her fit to stand trial. On December 9, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and on January 27, 2022, Kessler was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The prosecution believes Kessler's motive was to silence Jolene Cummings, who threatened to expose her lies during a press conference. Sheriff Lipa expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating that Kessler would spend the rest of her life in Florida State Prison. Unfortunately, Jolene Cummings' body was never found. The case of Christy Wilson. Christy Wilson was born on January 10, 1978, in San Jose, California. She attended Gunderson High School and later earned a business degree from California State University, Chico. Her parents, Debbie Boyd and Patrick Boyd, described her as an exceptional student and athlete. After college, Christy landed a job at a tech company near Sacramento, where she worked until the high-tech crisis led to her job loss. In her free time, she enjoyed playing blackjack at a local casino, where she met her boyfriend, Danny Berlando. Initially, Christy's relationship with Danny was quite harmonious, and her family and friends thought they made a great couple. However, things took a turn for the worse after they moved to Sacramento together. Christy started showing up with bruises, but she wouldn't talk about how she got them. Following her job loss, Christy returned to her parents' home in San Jose. She eventually received a job offer in San Francisco and decided to start fresh. On October 4, 2005, Christy Wilson went to Sacramento to collect her remaining belongings. However, just 2 days later, her boyfriend Danny Berlando contacted her parents to report that she had vanished. He claimed to have searched for her by contacting local jails, hospitals, and friends before reaching out to them. The police were also informed about Christy's disappearance. According to Danny, Christy visited his apartment on October 4th. He then went to dinner with his family, while Christy went to the Thunder Valley Casino. This was the last time he saw her. It's worth noting that Danny's family didn't get along with Christy, which is why he attended the family dinner without her. The tension between their families was due to concerns about Christy's safety. Christy's family had noticed bruises on her body, suggesting that Danny had been physically abusing her. Christy's stepfather, Patrick Boyd, was particularly upset when he found out about the abuse. He wanted to confront Danny, but Christy's mother, Debbie Boyd, intervened to prevent a confrontation. Danny Berlando was 31 years old when Christy disappeared. He had recently lost his job as a car salesman. About a month prior to Christy's disappearance, the police were called to their residence after neighbors reported hearing Christy screaming. Although the police found that they had been arguing, they made up quickly and no further action was taken. When Christy went missing, Danny was the primary suspect due to their previous altercation. His decision to wait nearly 48 hours before reporting her missing to the police raised suspicions that he might have used this time to destroy evidence. However, Danny cooperated fully with the investigation, allowing police to examine his phone records, credit card activity, computer, apartment, and car. Despite being a suspect, no evidence of foul play was found. Danny had an alibi for the time Christy went missing, having attended a family dinner. Before reporting her disappearance, he attempted to contact Christy 78 times, but she did not answer. The police interviewed Christy's friends and family, and reviewed her phone and credit card activities, but found no activity on her bank account since October 4th. Christy's family and the police worked together to find her. They searched the area with dogs, volunteers, and a police helicopter. Her family asked people to share any information they had about Christy's whereabouts. Danny searched for Christy on his own and visited the Thunder Valley Casino. The casino staff couldn't give him any useful information. However, he found Christy's car in the parking lot. The investigators arrived at the casino and confirmed Christy's car was still in the parking lot. This finding caused confusion rather than answers. There were no signs of a fight or other suspicious activities around her car. The big questions were whether Christy left the casino on her own and why her car remained there. Detectives reviewed security footage inside and outside the casino, hoping to understand what had happened. At the same time, the police conducted another search of Christy and Danny's apartment, but it yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christie's stepfather, Patrick, a police officer, organized a search of a nearby river, but nothing was found. The investigation shifted its focus to Thunder Valley Casino, where Christie was last seen. Using her player's card, investigators tracked her movements and discovered that she played blackjack around 11 p.m. The casino's recordings showed Christie sitting at a table with a man, but Danny was nowhere to be seen. The man and Christie appeared to be communicating, congratulating each other on wins and offering comfort when they lost. They spent about 6 hours together at the casino, during which the man was seen putting his hand on Christie's shoulder. Christie had a night of mixed results. She began well, winning and keeping a good count of the cards. However, as the evening progressed, her luck turned, and she started to lose. As she consumed more drinks, Christie became increasingly agitated and lost control. The casino staff eventually asked her to leave, but the man intervened, saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this beauty." Shortly after, the man and Christie left the casino together, as captured on camera. During a visit to Thunder Valley, detectives made a significant discovery when casino employees found a mobile phone under a blackjack table. The phone belonged to Christie, and it's possible she had unknowingly dropped it. This development hindered the police's plan to track Christie's location through her phone. Further investigation of the CCTV footage revealed that Christie and a man she had met at the casino left the blackjack table and went to the parking lot 4 minutes later. A white car, later identified as belonging to the man, left the parking lot, while Christie's vehicle remained in place. The detective suspected that Christie might have left with the man in his car. The police needed to determine whether Christie had willingly accompanied the man or if he had forced her into the car. After analyzing players' card data, detectives identified the man as Mario Flavio Garcia, a 53-year-old family man from Auburn with a successful IT career. As the investigation progressed, the detectives discovered that the white car seen in the CCTV footage belonged to Mario Garcia, making him the primary suspect in Christie's disappearance. However, the footage showed that Mario Garcia appeared to be alone in the car when he left the parking lot, and Christie never returned to her vehicle. Mario Garcia had stayed in the parking lot for 3 minutes and 41 seconds, raising questions about what might have occurred between him and Christie during that time. Detectives investigating Mario Garcia's life discovered a stark contrast between his public and private persona. While he was a respected community member and football coach, he also had a dark history. 25 years prior, Mario had been arrested for kidnapping his ex-girlfriend, taking her to a secluded location, and forcing her into a sexual act at gunpoint. Despite the severity of the crime, the case was plea bargained down to assault with a deadly weapon, resulting in a lenient sentence of 18 months probation. This was not the only instance where Mario's caught the attention of police. In another incident, Mario was involved in a tumultuous relationship with Lynette Smith. In 1979, Mario, Lynette, and her mother, Violet Davis, spent Christmas together. After dinner, the three of them got into Lynette's car, which subsequently crashed into a river near Oakland Airport. Mario, the sole survivor, claimed Lynette was driving, but investigators could not confirm this. Violet Davis's body was found in a car, while Lynette's body was not recovered until a week later. The incident was initially believed to be an accident, and no one was charged in connection with the deaths. After collecting the available information, investigators interviewed Mario about Christie Wilson. He maintained he was unaware of her disappearance and stated that they left the casino together, parted ways politely after exchanging goodbyes, and went in different directions. Although he claimed to have headed home immediately, his words couldn't be confirmed or disputed through the casino's CCTV footage. Nonetheless, by reviewing security recordings from surrounding locations, investigators ascertained Mario lied. CCTV evidence outside of the casino caught Mario heading the opposite way of his claimed direction after they were separated. Mario claimed to have gone straight home and fallen asleep at 8:30 a.m. after leaving the casino. However, his wife refused to cooperate with the police, leaving detectives unable to verify his alibi. A review of Mario's cell phone records revealed discrepancies in his story. A call to his wife at 7:51 a.m. was made from a cell tower located far from his house, indicating he did not go home immediately after the casino. Mario also stated that he arrived at work at 9 a.m., but a colleague reported that he was late, arriving around 10 a.m. Further investigation revealed that Mario had scratches on his arm and a bruise under one eye the day after Christy Wilson's disappearance. When questioned, Mario attributed the injuries to a fall from a tree while pruning. However, detectives were skeptical of this explanation, as it is unlikely that someone would prune trees at night. The police asked a forensic expert to examine Mario Garcia's injuries. The expert found that the scratches on Mario's face and body didn't match the kind of injuries you'd get from falling out of a tree. There were 4 parallel scratches on his face, and 3 more on the left side of his chest. This was suspicious because Christy Wilson was right-handed. The police suspected Mario was involved in Christy's disappearance, so they got a search warrant for his car, home, and computer. Mario had claimed he went home after saying goodbye to Christy in the parking lot, but as investigators searched his car, they started to think Christy was probably dead. Mario had tried to clean up his car, washing both the inside and outside, and even throwing away the trunk mat. However, he hadn't been able to get rid of all the evidence. Initially, investigators found a small, unremarkable spot on the car seat that was later confirmed to be blood. However, the sample was not suitable for DNA analysis. Further examination of the vehicle revealed 2 long hairs and small blood splatters on the back door of the trunk. The hairs were matched to the missing person, Christy. Further examination of the bloodstains showed that they contained DNA from both Mario and Christy, which disagreed with Mario's statement that he and Christy had separated in the parking lot. This evidence suggested a physical altercation between Mario and Christy. A review of Mario's search history showed that he had been researching forensic toxicology and visiting websites that described how to secretly administer drugs to someone's drink on a date. This led investigators to suspect that Christy may have been a random victim who was targeted by Mario after they sat together at a table. It was possible that Mario had spiked her drink. To prove this, the police needed to find Christy's body. A thorough search of Garcia's 5-acre property was conducted, but unfortunately, no new leads were discovered. Mario Garcia was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder despite the absence of Christy Wilson's body. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial, which began on September 11, 2006. Prosecutors presented evidence suggesting that Mario had met Christy at a blackjack table, left the casino with her, attacked and killed her, and then hid her body. During the trial, Mario questioned the validity of the evidence, pointing out that only Christy's DNA was found on his car door, while the DNA of his family members and others who had been in the car was not detected. He suggested that the police had planted Christy's DNA as evidence. Mario stated to the court that he would not request leniency or pardon, claiming that he was innocent and did not commit the crime. However, the jury found him guilty on January 11, 2007, and he was sentenced to 59 years to life in prison. After the sentencing, Christy's family held out hope that Mario Garcia would finally reveal the location of her body. However, he refused to cooperate. As the years went by, the family struggled to move on with their lives, which had been forever changed by the traumatic experience. Mario's repeated appeals only added to their distress, despite being unsuccessful. The ongoing appeals prevented the family from finding closure and moving on with their lives. In 2018, Mario offered to provide information about Christy's body in exchange for an early release from prison. However, Christy's mother, Debbie Boyd, was unwilling to negotiate with him. She felt that using her daughter's body as a bargaining chip would be unacceptable. The police then turned to Mario's family for assistance, knowing that his ex-wife, Jean, had divorced him after his imprisonment. Jean eventually lost faith in her ex-husband and began to suspect that he was involved in Christie's disappearance and death. As part of their investigation, police spoke with Mario Garcia's sons, Chris and Andy, asking them to recall any details about the days surrounding Christie's disappearance and their father's subsequent arrest. The police were particularly interested in learning about any changes in Mario's behavior during that time. Chris remembered that he had a football game around that time and saw his father working frantically on a tractor on their plot. Mario's eyes had a wild, frantic look that caught Chris off guard. When Chris asked his father to attend his game, Mario firmly refused, saying he's not going. This response struck Chris as out of character for his father. At the request of investigators, Chris accompanied them to his childhood home. Chris showed them the exact location where he had seen his father working on the tractor, which was next to a detached garage near the road, approximately 100 yards from the Mario residence. It became clear that Mario had made a significant effort to conceal any evidence, taking advantage of the 4 or 5 days he had to cover his tracks. Notably, police had previously searched the Mario property with police dogs in 2005, but had found nothing at the time. In a new development, investigators took a different approach in August 2020. They hired a company that specializes in ground-penetrating radar technology to scan the 5-acre property owned by Mario Garcia. The technicians identified 8 potential locations with voids or pockets beneath the surface. After digging at the first 2 sites, they found nothing. However, at the 3rd location, which was the same spot where Mario Garcia had been digging with a tractor, the police discovered a skeleton. Further examination confirmed that the remains belonged to Christy Wilson, 15 years after she went missing. Although the exact cause of Christy's death remains unknown, experts determined that she had suffered a broken arm and nose. The investigators, who had been working on the case for 15 years, traveled to Arizona to personally inform Christy's mother, Debbie Boyd, about the discovery. The news brought a mix of sadness and relief to Christy's family, who could finally find closure and say goodbye to their daughter. Placer County Sheriff Devin Bell announced that Christy Wilson's case has been solved, thanks to efforts by his team. This was achieved without the cooperation of Mario Garcia, a convicted murderer who is currently in prison. Mario, 67, had refused to provide any information to help the family find closure. According to Christy's mother, Debbie Boyd, this news brings her family peace and marks the end of a painful chapter. She praised the perseverance of the police and thanked them for their tireless efforts. Notably, Mario had died of pneumonia in 2020, but even his death had brought some peace to the family. Mario had never pleaded guilty to any involvement in Christy's disappearance, despite her remains being found on Mario's plot in 2005. The case of Kathy Krausnack. On February 19, 1982, police were called to the Krausnack family home, where they discovered the body of 29-year-old Kathy Krausnack. An axe was found embedded in her head, the only fatal wound. Earlier, Kathy's 30-year-old husband, James Krausnack, had run into a neighbor's house while holding their 3-year-old daughter. He was covered in blood and appeared distressed, reporting that his wife showed no signs of life. While crying and agitated, he waited for police to arrive. James told police that he had left for work at Kodak around 6:30 a.m., where he worked as an economist. He spent the day completing routine tasks while his wife, Kathy, and their daughter, Sarah, were still asleep at home. Kathy had planned to spend the day with their daughter. When James returned home around 5 p.m., he noticed the garage door open, the kitchen window broken, and the glass door between the garage and the house shattered. Realizing something was wrong, he went inside and found his wife lying on the bed. He was shocked and momentarily unable to speak. He then noticed his 3-year-old daughter lying next to the bed, unharmed. To ensure her safety, James took his daughter to a neighbor's house. The neighbor opened the door and saw James, who was frightened and crying. At his request, she called 911, asking them to come quickly because he claimed there had been a murder. Police spoke to Sarah, who seemed unaware of what had happened. She said she saw a multicolored bad guy on her parents' bed and saw her mother with blood on her face. It is extremely distressing for a child to be left alone in an apartment with a murdered mother for an entire day. This was a disturbing aspect of the case. Fortunately, Sarah was too young to fully understand the situation, so it did not affect her mental state much. The neighbors did not observe or hear anything unusual. The police investigated the crime scene but did not find any significant evidence or clues. The murder weapon, an axe, was taken from Kathy's family garage. It had been used to cut the grass. Notably, there were no fingerprints on the axe, suggesting that it had been deliberately cleaned. In addition, forensic experts found no fingerprints inside the house, which was puzzling since 3 people lived there and could have touched many objects. The police found this strange and assumed that the perpetrator had cleaned the entire house. However, the police did notice something strange in the kitchen. A damp bathroom rug was drying in the garage. James claimed that he had no idea why the rug was there and that nothing of note had been found on it. In 1982, forensic techniques did not allow for the collection or analysis of DNA. Police suspected that the incident was a botched robbery, theorizing that the attackers may have become frightened and decided to eliminate Kathy, a potential witness. However, some valuables were still intact. Kathy's bag, which had been left in the kitchen, had been emptied onto the floor, but the contents, money, jewelry, and expensive tea sets, were all there and neatly arranged. This raised an important question: why did the criminals leave these items behind? Even the cash that was openly left on the dresser had not been taken. Perhaps the criminal had scared Kathy, but in this case, fingerprints would have been left on these items. Yet, there were none, which was puzzling. This behavior was unusual, and the police noticed these discrepancies, raising suspicions that the crime scene had been staged. Some items were arranged in a way that suggested they were deliberately placed there. A crucial reason for dismissing robbery as a motive was that nothing had been stolen. Seasoned police officers, who regularly dealt with burglaries, immediately recognized that this incident was different. While murders were rare in Brighton, thefts and robberies occurred almost daily. Police believed that Kathy's death was a premeditated murder. The initial suspect was, of course, her husband, who discovered her body. Police began investigating James. James's friends and acquaintances described them as a happy, even idealistic couple. They had both grown up in the same Michigan city. Kathy came from a family of truck drivers, while James's parents owned a successful carpet store. They met in high school and began dating in college, eventually marrying on May 3, 1974. After their marriage, Kathy continued her studies in economics in Colorado, and in 1978, they celebrated the birth of their daughter, Sarah. Meanwhile, James became interested in further education and pursued a doctorate in economics. James then took a teaching position at the University of Lynchburg in Virginia. In 1981, the family relocated to Brighton, New York, where James found a job as an economist. Kathy was a devoted and caring mother to their daughter, always attentive and loving. However, friends noticed a significant change in Kathy's mood 6 months before her death. She became unusually irritable and restless, though they did not know the reasons behind her behavior. As the police investigated the family's situation, they discovered that things were not as perfect as they initially appeared. The couple kept their problems private, never discussing their issues publicly or seeking advice from others, which made it difficult to gather information. However, police found a brochure for marriage counseling in the family car, suggesting that there had been ongoing discord in their relationship. The police also contacted James's employer and learned that he had misrepresented his qualifications, claiming to have a doctorate. This deception led to him being assigned a role he was unqualified for, resulting in stress at work and further complicating his situation. James's cooperation helped the police gather information, and James agreed to attend the next meeting for questioning, but he did not attend. Less than 24 hours after the murder, he left the city without informing the police. This action of his made the police suspicious. He was intentionally fleeing. Police later discovered that James had gone to his parents' home in Michigan. They found him again and questioned him. He cooperated with the police by providing blood and hair samples for analysis. Unfortunately, DNA testing was not available at the time, so this did not yield any useful results. 10 days after Kathy was found dead in her bed, James hired a lawyer. The police did not have enough evidence to bring any charges in 1982. Police focused on information that James had left for work at 6:30 a.m. It was important to verify this detail and determine whether he could have been home at the time of the murder. Forensic examinations showed that Kathy had died in her sleep between 4:30 and 7:30 a.m., meaning she could have been murdered with an axe shortly after James left for work. While it was possible that the husband had committed the crime before leaving, it was difficult to understand why he would do so and then go to work, leaving their 3-year-old daughter behind. The mother's body remained in the house throughout the day. The investigation stalled. The evidence collected and the documents found did not shed light on the events of that morning. The James had no clear motive, making a jury trial unlikely. If the prosecution lost, they would not be able to bring new charges against him. In 1997, James met his old friend Sharon at a trade show. Their relationship quickly blossomed, and James asked her out, which she accepted. Sharon noticed that James was still deeply affected by his past loss. He seemed shocked by the traumatic event. James shared the basics of that terrible day with Sharon but avoided going into detail, and Sharon did not want to press him for more information. Their mutual understanding helped strengthen their relationship, and they later married. In 1999, they moved to another city, then moved across the country. At the same time, police continued their efforts on Kathy's case. New police re-examined the evidence, leading to the analysis of a large number of items related to the case. The police were committed to finding justice for the woman who had been so brutally murdered. In 2015, the FBI assisted Brighton police in their investigation, which led them to focus on a suspect, Kathy's husband, James. On April 16, 2016, 34 years after the murder, police made a surprise visit to James's home, hoping to meet him and possibly uncover inconsistencies in his previous statements. However, their plan did not go as planned. James appeared calm and welcoming. He chatted with the officers, agreed to have the conversation recorded, and did not request an attorney. They talked for an hour at the kitchen table, but James remained calm throughout the conversation. Eventually, one of the police asked him directly if he had anything to do with his wife's death. James was angry, said that he would never hurt his wife. Sharon defended him, saying that in all the time they were together, she had never witnessed any aggressive behavior from him. He was a caring and loving husband who would never lay a hand on her. She firmly believed that he was incapable of such cruelty. Sharon also participated in the police interrogation. Throughout the interrogation, she never doubted her husband's innocence. She felt that she had seen his sincere heart and kind nature over the years. Although her views seemed naive, she held these beliefs deeply. She never asked about the fate of James' ex-wife, as she was satisfied with the brief explanation he gave at the beginning of their relationship and never mentioned it again. Police found themselves at a dead end once again, prompting the decision to review all the evidence collected for DNA testing, nearly 40 years after the crime. The murder weapon, an axe found in the victim's head, was sent to the FBI for analysis. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate any usable DNA on it because it had been tampered with. This was a significant setback. The police then sought to determine when the crime had occurred. One of the United States' leading forensic experts, Michael Baden, analyzed all the available information about the body. He concluded that the woman had likely died around 3:30 a.m., based on her body temperature and the amount of undigested food in her stomach. Therefore, when James arrived at work at 6:30 a.m., he would have definitely noticed that something was wrong. Police were skeptical of the idea of a botched robbery because nothing was taken. They questioned why the robbers would kill a woman who was sleeping and did not witness the robbery. This conflict led to the filing of murder charges. On November 8, 2019, James was arrested after being charged, but the 67-year-old did not confess to the crime. Police used the time of death to investigate a murder that had occurred 40 years earlier. They found evidence that a robbery had been staged. With this information, law enforcement and James presented their case to the jury, focusing on James' alleged involvement in the murder of Kathy Krausnack, his first wife. During the police, investigators discovered a dangerous criminal named Edla Rabbi, who lived about 1.5 miles from Kathy's home in 1982. Rabbi was notorious for his harmful taste in women. Despite being arrested several times, Rabbi often received light sentences and served a total of more than 32 years in prison before his death in 2014. He confessed to killing Kathy but gave many inaccurate details, leading to skepticism about his claims. After each time in custody, he hunted for new victims, torturing them. His first confirmed murder occurred in 1991 when he strangled a 27-year-old woman named Stephanie Kupczynski. Although he confessed to the crime in 2012, he maintained that he had no intention of killing her and that the situation had spiraled out of control. Shortly before Kathy's murder, Rabbi had been released from prison in the 1980s. He was questioned and the investigation began, but was not considered a likely suspect. Police questioned him briefly and then released him. As a result, James's lawyers claimed the police were negligent. Instead of pursuing the real killer, they chose to blame the grieving husband, James, who they considered the prime suspect. This situation had a significant impact on society. It was revealed that not only was the criminal dead by the time the case was revisited, but the police who investigated it in the 1980s were also deceased, meaning they could not be held accountable for any mistakes. During the original police, the police had only spoken to the murderer once and then disregarded him entirely. Since Edla Rabbi had passed away, he could not be questioned to clarify his role in the case. Nevertheless, many involved in the investigation still questioned whether he was connected to Kathy's murder. Although he confessed to killing Kathy before his death, numerous inconsistencies arose in his account, particularly regarding the handwriting, which did not resemble his at all. This conclusion was reached by all the experts who examined his case. First, he had a history of rape rather than robbery, yet no signs of sexual assault were found. Additionally, the murder weapon, an axe, was not typical of his methods, and the handwriting was evidently different. As a result, police did not consider him a suspect. Years ago, the prosecution was leaning towards the theory that Kathy's husband was her killer rather than a nearby maniac. During the trial, the prosecutor presented the time of death as crucial evidence. However, several defense experts disagreed with the assertion that Kathy died early, with most believing it occurred before 6:30 in the morning. It is believed that Kathy died at 6:30 a.m. after her husband left for work. The investigation was complicated by the fact that Kathy was under an electric blanket, and it was unclear whether it was on or off at the time of her death. If it was on, the temperature it reached was unknown. Experts attempted to estimate the time of death by analyzing the drop in body temperature. Ultimately, There is no reliable method for determining the exact time of death. Experts have differed, resulting in a margin of error of several hours. Another piece of evidence cited by the police was a shoe imprint found pressing down on a garbage bag at the crime scene. This imprint resembled the shoes worn by Kathy's husband, who was absent at the time of her death. However, this evidence alone was not enough to establish his guilt. The prosecutor argued that the husband was the only possible suspect because he had a motive stemming from family issues. After lengthy deliberations at the hearing, the verdict was announced in court. The jury were unanimous in only one opinion, that the crime was too confusing and contradictory, and the evidence too dubious and easily dismissed. Despite this, James Krausnak was convicted of second-degree murder in November 2022 and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The verdict came as a shock to many, especially to those close to James who knew him well. They had remained certain that James was not guilty because there was no serious evidence of his involvement. James himself also asserted his innocence,